Fire away, fire away. Hello, all, and welcome to what will almost certainly be a
We're good on Twitch.
grudge-filled
Okay, we're good. Awesome.
episode of Lorebeards. How is everybody out there? I hope you're well, and I hope you can hear us well too.
Yep, and also, big happy Easter to everyone. Happy Trans Day, Visibility, Taco Day, all those things. There's a lot of days all wrapped up into one because that's just the way it works these days. But we're hope whatever you're out there celebrating, you're having a good one.
Indeed, happy days.
So before we get into it, just to run through a couple little of the usual things before we start. Just like the usuals, there will be a vote on my channel for the next Lorebeards for the next week later on today, so keep an eye out for that. I've already got some really good ideas cooking in my head because a lot of people have been asking for particular things. We also, if you haven't heard yet about Dark Deeds, there's also that. If Andy wants to talk about it for a second, other side, yep, there you go.
Dark Deeds! Just to repeat, the enthusiastic tone, the game from Warhammer Legends, Andy Chambers and Mark Gibbons, called Dark Deeds, is now available for you to pre-order. Now, you might immediately say, Andy, why are you so excited about this, and why do you keep going on about it? Because I helped develop this particular game alongside my good pals over at Rookery Publications, including Lindsay Law, obviously my wife, and Andy Leask, who you may know from the Warhammer streams. They play two of the characters in there. You also may know them because they all wrote Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition alongside me. So do take a look at this. If you want to know more about it, you can see the good old links over for that. Let me just post in fact links like so for the
be like Grey Fate. Already have pre-ordered. I've already pre-ordered my copy. Grey Fate's already pre-ordered his copy. So get on it, folks.
So we're obviously super excited for this, and to say that we need to sell a lot of these to make sure that we can keep on selling more and moving on to all of our roleplay books as well is a little bit of an underestimation. So if you'd just like to support us, even if the game is not necessarily your thing, go take a check out on the pre-order right now. But I will say the game is your thing. It's just so much fun to play. So go do check it out. There's the pre-order links already, hopefully in the chat, for both the UK and the US links.
Yep, and just to do another god tier plug, if you're like, well, how can I use this if I don't traditionally play board games? The Rookery yesterday just did an awesome stream about how to use it in your roleplay games, amongst other things. So be sure to go check that out as well.
Yeah, it was a super fun stream, actually. Yeah, enjoyed that.
People were doing super chats before the stream even started, so and almost all of them are CB4N. So let's get caught up on those, and then we'll hop into the intro. Can't watch this week live. Oh, due to Easter festivities. Just want to say thanks for the weekly streams. Love my Sunday routine of working out, listening to Lauren cracking jokes. Thank you. Oh, well, we appreciate it. Thank you so much. And of course, yes, happy Easter and Trans Day, visibility and all that stuff. Thank you so much, CB4N. And then you're also, we all know that Grombrindal is kept on fleek by his personal tailor Crimlow, but how does Crimlow cut those suits to make him look so tall? It's just, it's something about it's something about frog eyes, man. It's something about frog eyes, and maybe that being raised in Norscan culture gave him a proper appreciation for how to accentuate the beard, because those Norskins like to show off too. Mendatus Callum, thank you so much for the happy Easter. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Indeed.
Zar94, thank you for
thank you very much. Very generous.
Very generous super chat. Appreciate it. I'm babysitting my 2-year-old nephew this morning. This stream will be his first exposure to Warhammer, as is proper with the White Dwarf. Let's have a good time. Make a new core memory for him. Happy Easter, everyone. Well, we hope you all enjoy it. Schwarzscha, Tarmacon must rise. Where's Tarmacon? Hopefully, we'll get an announcement this week, maybe next week at the latest, assuming there hasn't been any delays, but we're all really excited for that. So hopefully that'll be soon. Zedron Davis, will we be covering his multiversal travels in the White Dwarf magazine? Yes, to a notable extent. We're going to be we'll get into it. I'll just leave it at that. We'll get into it. Sean Schultz, is there a Dawi Easter version of the holiday? Not that I recall off the top of my head.
Oh, I'm going through them.
Yeah, but there is kind of a genuinely unintended on our side. Okay, this was not intentional, but there is kind of a genuine humor to having Grombrindal be the Easter stream. because he does kind of come back, though
kind of does,
though more to avenge the sins of others as opposed to forgiving them. So not quite the same.
Yeah.
But on the side, happy Twitch chat. Happy Twitch chat or Dorks Day, which is every day.
Sure.
And then Jonathan Scott, boy, this sure is the tallest stream yet. Its height and length is of previously unheard magnitude. Help, I'm being held hostage by dwarves. They're making me compliment their height.
I'm just going to bring up one comment as well, just because inevitably a bunch of you will ask this question, and I'll answer this later. Because obviously we're here to discuss good old Grombrindal himself, but at some point, probably between the questions and once we've finished our deep dive into all of the great sagas that do surround the White Dwarf, I'll dedicate a little bit of time to this, but only a small amount, because it's not really about that. But seriously, have you pre-ordered Dark Deeds? Because if you haven't, you really should. I'm going to say that at least twice, more, maybe 3 times.
My money's on at least 3 times. All right.
Yeah, me too.
So, with all that, we are ready to hop into it. So, Andy, take us away.
All righty. I would like to take you all back in time, like we're in our own personal DeLoreans, all the way back to the point when younger Andy, beard-free Andy, and I know such a thing seems very strange to consider. But this was in those hoary days of old, before the old beard had come through, that I was working for Games Workshop. And Games Workshop was celebrating a unique and exciting event. Now, because I was working for Games Workshop, just off the tail end of celebrating a different event for Games Workshop at that point that was called Apocalypse 100. Now, Apocalypse 100 was when the first 100 stores by Games Workshop had been opened. And it was a big event. There was all sorts of exciting things happening all over the shops, and they released a unique model called Captain Centurious. And obviously, they 40k focused that one because it was their big day. And they released a special Apocalypse 100 t-shirt, which I have worn in multiple streams in the past because I still own it, with artwork from good old Mark Gibbons, who is also behind Dark Deeds. That was accidental. That was not actually planned. Dark Deeds! Sorry. That's one of them already. Uh-oh! It's going to be tough to keep it to 3. So, a lovely piece of artwork sitting on the front of that from the Dark Angels for the Apocalypse 100 tour. And we were all super excited for that, but we were also heading towards White Dwarf number 200. Now, this is all the way back in late 1996. Now, I was a far younger man in those days. As I say, my beard had yet to come in. I wasn't even really a beardling, but I was most certainly someone who was fascinated by the fact that they took a step. The White Dwarf had been a symbol of White Dwarf pretty much from the beginning. And by that, I mean the magazine White Dwarf that was released by Games Workshop. For the 100th episode, they got themselves a really super cool little model, and they'd done a whole bunch of stuff with it all the way back then, but it wasn't really an actual character. It was more of a, isn't this cool, White Dwarf's 100 episodes in, issues in. At 200, though, they took a different step. And they said, you know what? The White Dwarf is actually a character in Warhammer. Here's our new model by Colin Dixon. Doesn't it look funky? And here's Nigel Stillman to give you a bit of background. Now, Nigel Stillman went to town on a quick double-page spread, that was repeated effectively 100 issues later, even though they changed the lore completely much later. And we got ourselves our first insight into who Grombrindal, the White Dwarf, was. And it's fair to say that this very first introduction to the character was filled with myth and mystery, because they didn't say the White Dwarf is this. They said the White Dwarf could be this, could be that, could be more than 47 other potential things. Indeed, at this point in the background, they quite clearly state that all dwarves, literally every single last one of them, memorizes the great saga of White Dwarf. And they are so, let's say, certain about this that it's almost ridiculous to consider that every single dwarf has memorized this everywhere.
No matter where you come from, you all know
no matter where they're from, including all 47 different versions of who the White Dwarf might actually be, including some that one in particular that we are definitely going to be diving into in this particular episode, because one of them is pretty much who the White Dwarf actually is.
Yeah.
And Through the course of that little double page spread, which we'll cover to a certain amount of degree as we progress through the stream, they presented effectively this lone figure that could pop up whenever dwarfs were in significant trouble. And he would often arrive cloaked up in tattered rags, often with his pipe, noting some special lore of some or another because he's ancient and he's from the past. And then he would whip it off, show himself to be the White Dwarf, and then hack up some bad guys, at least as far as the dwarfs were concerned. And he had become a creature of myth. And I do say the word creature because he wasn't so much a dwarf in the eyes of many. He was much more than a simple dwarf because he appeared wherever and always was on the winning side, pretty much. And he had been going for not just 1 or 2 years, not just 1 or 2 centuries, but pretty much for as long as the dwarfs could remember, which is one of the reasons why there are so many different myths surrounding him. And that was largely where they left it. And the character sat fallow. Not completely fallow, but almost entirely never used again. It was a fun drop-in all the way back in the mid-90s for Isn't This Cool? Indeed, the actual miniature and the rules for it were 100% optional. This was just a special character that was added, couldn't be used in tournaments. It was just popped in because it was super fun. They were celebrating White Dwarf, the magazine, reaching its 200th issue. It's also worth noting at this point that it was roundly lauded as stupid. Now, this might surprise a few folks out there, particularly if they've come to the lore later and they've gone, hey, the White Dwarf's freaking awesome. What a great story good old Grombrindal has. I really like this. At this point, everyone went, they made an actual proper special rule for the White Dwarf magazine in Warhammer. This is stupid. And the broad customer response to it was largely, yeah, this is dumb. This isn't cool. This is daft. And that's possibly one of the reasons why they didn't touch it again. But it's fair to say that those who were behind its creation, Nigel Stillman et al. Over at the studio, they were largely not exposed to this because they weren't on the front line. They weren't speaking to customers every week. And we are in super pre-internet days. Now, the internet's up and it's going, but nobody's really using it in a certain, let's say, age circle. People like me were, because I was super young and I was super excited to be trying this new technology. I used to creep out to the local university, pretend to be a student and sit it all day. It was great. But I didn't say that. So that didn't happen. Totally happened. Got my own free email address and those were good times. But this was to change significantly. Many years later, and we're going all the way up to 2004 now. So we're almost, 8 years later? And we're at episode. I'm really stuck with the idea of episode. So stuck on Lawhammer. We're at issue number 300. And this is where everything changes. Because Grombrindal comes forth again, inevitably. Yet another new model. Yet some more special rules. But this time they do 2 completely different things. Number 1, they ground Grombrindal deeply into the setting by dropping in a big comic. Now, this is somewhat of a surprise to many folks, but at this point, we were just on the, let's say, tail end of the beginnings of the Inferno magazine. And Inferno magazine was an old magazine that Games Workshop used to produce that was filled with short stories and comics. And it was super cool. We also had Warhammer Monthly, which was a literal comic that Games Workshop produced, going through 40k, Warhammer stuff, Necromunda stuff, all manner of cool characters that we know and love today were introduced by both Inferno and by Warhammer Monthly. People like Malice Darkblade wouldn't have existed if it hadn't been for these particular comics. So Idea Comic was not unknown at the time, but for White Dwarf, they hadn't really done that sort of thing since all the way back in Thrud times and Gobbledygook, all the way back in ancient White Dwarfs. So this was a relatively novel thing, and it was actually good. As I recall, it was penned by Gordon Rennie, who lives pretty much local to where I am here. And it was a quick story of a bunch of dwarves dropped down inside one of the many tunnels, being attacked by Skaven and being saved by Grombrindal. And it does the classic tale that is repeated again and again to the point that it's now tired. But at least then for Warhammer, it wasn't. And that is that they're all gathered there. They're in trouble. They bang up the door. And the Skaven are outside squeaking away, trying to gnaw their way through the doors. And the dwarves are on the other side. And they're like, what are we going to do? Turn around and there's a big statue. And it's an ancient shrine to Grombrindal. And completely undermining the previous version of Grombrindal. They immediately say, what the fuck is this? Because they don't know. And one of them does and says, this is Grombrindal. And they're all like, oh, Grombrindal, I've sort of heard of him. Wait, what? Sort of? Don't all dwarves remember the entirety of all the saga? What is this nonsense? Have you not memorized it? And back in dwarf school? What's going on here? This makes no sense at all. But clearly these dwarves did not pay much attention back in dwarf school. But they paid enough, and each one of them tells a different story. The first of which is the story that this was King Snorri Whitebeard. And he swore great oaths that ensured that he would be coming back. But the next tells a completely different tale. And there they say it's Kalasha Kalan, a great king of slayers who was responsible for literally wiping out anything before him. But such was his pride that he claimed he was more powerful than the ancestor gods themselves. And as is often the case when foolish dwarves do such foolish things, 100% cursed, put in place, and he was going to be coming back to gnash his teeth. Another one of the stories is, in fact, the White Dwarf is Grimnir himself, who has come back in mortal form. So he may be elsewhere doing ancestor god stuff, but this is his mortal version, almost like an avatar that you might get from the elves. And the story here, I think, is fascinating, not because that's the story and it's true, but because there are dwarf myths suggesting such things could happen. Really putting a kibosh to a degree that the elves are the only ones that do this, or it's only an end times thing. The dwarves have strong myths of their own ancestor gods possibly walking amongst them. That's super fun. But beyond that, there's also one other story suggesting that good old Grombrindal is in fact an embodiment of dwarf will in and of itself. And quite clearly stated on the end of that, if even a single dwarf, just one, remains alive, then Grombrindal can return. And Grombrindal will kick ass and chew gum, because that's what Grombrindal does. I said Grombrindal too many times there. So lots of different backgrounds are given from him, really muddying the waters and repeating these stories that had come almost 8 years earlier. But then Gav Thorpe steps in. And Gav says, hey, you know all that stuff? Yeah, ignore that. And pretty much the opener, the opener to the next point of the article is super clear. Hey, you know Grombrindal? I'm about to tell you who he really is. And quickly states, we finally reveal who he is, while simultaneously leaving the door open to it potentially not being this, but seriously, it is. And a big long tale is spun there. Now, I'm not going to go into the whole tale there because we're going to be going through the history of White Dwarf and Snorri Whitebeard and indeed anything else. But it's fair to say that the very first, let's say, non-ancestor god high king of the dwarfs is not just confirmed to be the White Dwarf, is the White Dwarf. And they lay out the story for exactly why he becomes the White Dwarf and how, which is super fun. Then you get the special rules afterwards where, interestingly, they muddy the water right back up again. And they say, yeah, he's probably not Snorri Whitebeard. So be aware that for all we're going to say, yeah, he freaking is, that the lore itself goes to some steps to make it very, very, very clear that regardless of what one story might say and another story might say, it's possible that the White Dwarf isn't what everybody claims he is. Now, the reason that we bring this up quite firmly is because for all we're going to take, much like we did with good old Vashanesh, a particular route. We're going to make claims and we're going to be relatively categorical with it. It is quite likely that Games Workshop at a later point will say, you know that thing you thought was true? It isn't. You know all those times that we said it might be something else? It is. And as we move through later White Dwarves, you'll find that good old White Dwarf is used in a variety of different ways, which we will cover as we move on. All over the place, in fact, which is super fun. So that's at least how I started off with the White Dwarf. Everybody's got their own tales. If I was going to end on one last point, the thing that really brought the White Dwarf back to my mind was all the way back with, I think it might have been Total War 1. I think it was. And the White Dwarf is offered as a piece of extra DLC if you did something. I can't remember what it was.
Yeah, so for the Total War thing, what it was is that they had pretty much just brought back the White Dwarf magazine, though it was still in a different form.
That's it, because I bought that one.
Yeah, it wasn't. So for those unaware, when the end times happened, one of the things that happened, not as a direct result, but happened as Games Workshop like drastically changing everything they were doing as a company to try and, because things were not going well for them back then as a company. So what they one of the things they did was they discontinued the White Dwarf magazine because they didn't want to pay people to make it every month. And this is after they had already shortened it to being more of like a plasticky little magazine that only had like 30 pages. Instead of what like people were used to. And if you're playing nowadays, you may go, oh, that doesn't make any sense because I pick up White Dwarfs every month now and they're like full magazines again, because it came back. And when it kind of originally was coming back, one of the things they did to promote Total War Warhammer 1 is they released a free update to the game that if you got a White Dwarf magazine, you would get Grombrindal as a playable character for free. Which was super exciting and fun for a lot of people. And he was like,
so I bought it.
Lord that came into the game.
I was 100% behind that. I bought it. I was like, yep, I'm doing that. I want my own free DLC piece. Oh, damn straight. Bye. So for me, that's when it all came back. And all the old memories came back as well when we got that one. Because by this point in his cycle, he was no longer a stupid thing that had been dropped in to just put the White Dwarf magazine into the Warhammer world. In time, everyone had grown used to it, and it not only grown used to it, had started to accept it as a cool part of the lore. And I will argue, largely that's because Gav Thorpe had grounded it within the stories that everybody already knew. So it made some sort of sense, rather than just being that stupid thing that they added for fun. And that really made it a part of the existing Warhammer lore in a way that really made it feel special, unique, and also thematically accurate for both the dwarves and the elves, as we'll go on to, and the entire situation that they had. Suddenly it was part of a far cooler, far deeper, and far more tragic story that was slowly but surely unfolding. And as we mentioned in our end time stream, we were very disappointed with how it all concluded because it didn't conclude that story.
But we'll get into all the various appearances of that here in just a minute. But I'm going to get caught up on Super Chats and stuff really quick, and then we're going to hop back into it.
To the saga.
Yeah, so we're going to here. CEO of Necromancy, thank you so much. So excited to listen to this tonight. Grombrindal is so genuinely interesting. He is. There's a lot of funny and interesting things to talk about with him that we will get into here in a minute. How much for Andy to twist GW's arm into finally making a 40K squats novel? Yeah, how much money for you to twist Games Workshop's arm, Andy?
I don't have any real contact with that library anymore. I haven't done for about, 15 years. Is it that long? It is about that long, because I stepped away when Black Library completely changed. And Marco, who was the founder of Black Library, moved on. So I moved on at about the same time and no longer pursued any desire to work on any of the background books because they no longer did them. All the background books went back to the studio, which meant they were handled in-house. So I was like, yeah, there's nothing for me to do. And I just moved on to the next bit. So I don't think I could, even if I wanted to. Sorry.
Sinchmaster, can Grombrindal halak his gra'aka correctly? I'm sure he can. I'm sure he can. Michael Santabria, thank you so much. Gotta head to Mass, catch stream later. Happy Easter. Is there any interaction options between Grom and his ancestor sibling? We will get to that in a minute. There's some interesting things we'll get into. Glorious Dwarf Gandalf, as I first came to understand him. To be fair, it's not an inaccurate way to look at it.
It's really not. Nice one, my dad is.
Yeah, that's fair. Dwarves that don't know Grombrindal sounds like Skaven in a trench coat, especially if they call themselves dwarves. Then you know they're Skaven in a trench coat.
Caught.
Well,
thanks, Writer.
Cole Patterson, I believe the first stats of any sort were in White Dwarf number 50 in the Fiend Factory for AD&D and RuneQuest alongside side stats for Ian Livingstone.
Yep. All the way back then, I have that White Dwarf somewhere here. But I went for the more Warhammer-y beginning because I felt that was a better place to start.
And then Alan Costellos, sorry, Alan Castellanos. There we go. Hey guys, love your work. Always down for some Dolly Tales. Can't stay for the live version. I'll catch you guys in the VOD. And that's totally fine. We know a lot of people are probably busy with church and stuff, especially at this hour today, which is, totally fine. So, Grombrindal. One of the things that's very, very interesting about him as a character. So Andy had a marvelous intro there, as he always does. And the thing about Grombrindal that's kind of hilarious is that because of the way the magazine works, Games Workshop kind of eventually hit a point. Oh yes, Twitch messages. Thank you. I'll grab those while I'm talking. Where they like to use Grombrindal for a lot of things. He's just two halflings in a chainmail trench coat. Obviously, yeah. That beard's far too glorious to be real, right?
Rather amusingly, the Gavthorpe story, where he confirms who it is, has a lot of halflings in it. Which was, I'll be honest, quite a surprise because Games Workshop often tried to distance themselves from mentioning halflings at all. And then they just grounded it right in with the White Dwarf story, which was super fun.
Yeah, so the fun aspects about Grombrindal is that Games Workshop kind of hit a point where he literally becomes, like, as he should, the full mascot for the magazine to such a ridiculous extent that he starts being used all over the place and started having minis released on a yearly basis. So every single calendar year, there'd be a new Grombrindal model to celebrate the year. And in order to be able to keep that up, they started putting Grombrindal in some very bizarre situations. Some of them were very epic centerpiece models, like the classic one that everybody knows, where you have Grombrindal standing on top of a shield, being carried by Gotrek Gurnison and Joseph Bugman, which is a beyond famous model. They're actually re-releasing it for the old world for anyone that wants to pick that up because it's so classic. But there's also a lot of ones where you get Grombrindal as a Slayer, or Grombrindal as his own iteration of Bugman, or Grombrindal as just a regular Dwarf Lord, Grombrindal as a Space Marine, Grombrindal as, like, he just shows up in all sorts of Grombrindal as Santa in a sleigh. Like, just shows up in all these. There's Tech Grombrindal from the Mechanicus. Like, there's all these really hilarious iterations of Grombrindal that, and furthermore, they also added to all the White Dwarf magazines an in lore segment where viewers could send in questions, and they do it to this day. And Grombrindal would write answers, but they're written from Grombrindal's perspective. So, but he also demonstrates that he not only has knowledge in universe, 100% canonical in universe knowledge of all of the different Warhammer universes, but is of course aware of our universe, which is fucking hilarious. Granted, you shouldn't take that as to his Warhammer iteration because they're technically two different characters, the magazine character versus the Warhammer character. But what's interesting and I really enjoy is there are elements of the magazine character that were actually added onto the Warhammer character, which is to say that, like Andy talked about, while we are going to be talking about we're going to be following kind of a singular timeline for Grombrindal, canonically in the universe, he is not just that. He's more complicated than that. And in Age of Sigmar, they've really dialed that up to 11, where it's a really important aspect of his character, where now you can buy an entire book that I have somewhere on my shelf. But of course, the second I look for it, I don't know where the hell it... Oh, wait, no, I think that's it. Right there. Yeah, so if you... The Grombrindal, the White Dwarf book, which of course, Chronicles of the Wanderer. Amazing book, by the way. But it really dives home on that Grombrindal, every time you see him, could appear as something different. He quite literally is... Calling him a shapeshifter isn't probably a good way to describe it. It's more that he appears what he needs to be in that moment, what makes him more recognizable to the people that he's appearing to, which is why he's more of a spirit as opposed to like a physical entity. Though it's certainly not that he certainly is physical, but more in a violent way. So without further ado, keeping all of that in mind, we're going to delve into the story behind the true Grombrindal in quotation marks.
Yeah, and I think that it's fair to say that the story behind the true Grombrindal in quotation marks in no way invalidates all the other versions that sit out there of him, because it's quite easy, as we will go on to describe, to see the outcome of the individual whom we've already named. But for some reason, I'm keeping him mysterious. The individual that we're going to say is Grombrindal. It's quite easy to see how that could turn into this spiritual, almost godlike entity that appears as and where is required. For all, you've got the very physical and almost mundane version of Grombrindal, who is almost just perceived as a becloaked dwarf who goes from place to place to place. And I do mean goes from place to place, not just appears, goes and wanders. And the important word here is wanders, actually moves from X to Y to Z, and is generally perceived to be in the World's Edge Mountains or very close to them, going from one path to another, and being encountered, pursuing stories that can be heard on the wind, so to speak, and arriving where he's needed. But when he's encountered, importantly, if you are respectful and if you share with him the necessary beer, he will quite literally be a seer, which I find a super fascinating aspect of the character, as he popped up several times. So he's not just somebody who's wandering around. He is also someone who is literally spouting prophecy for the dwarfs. And this pops up in multiple iterations of how he's statted up in the little background sessions where it said, give him beer and he will respond with something that is portentous and important, meaning that he is not just good old dwarf savior, he's also spouting stuff about what's to come. So consider all of that as we now go back in time, entering our DeLorean one more time to consider what things were like at the beginning when the dwarfs were, well, if we go with the old world, shit.
Yeah. So, if we dial back the clock a lot, like we're going back to right after the Cataclysm, debatably during the Cataclysm, depending on where you want to start exactly, we have the ancestor gods. There are three that everybody knows about, of course, the big three, which are Grugni, Valea, and Grimnir. But they're not the only ancestor gods. It is a full pantheon, so to speak. Though, of course, they're not a pantheon in the traditional sense of like the elven gods, where they're these mysterious, otherworldly, etheric entities. They were people who were walking among the dwarves, teaching them things, and were doing things. You had Gazul, the Lord protecting the underworld, and you had then the various children of the ancestor gods. So you have Morgrim, you've got Skavor over there in the corner that nobody likes to talk about, and you've got oh gosh, their names in my head. I was literally just playing a Chaos War campaign, which has all of them in it. For various reasons, but that's not important. What is important is that most of the ancestor gods are the descendants of Valea. Now, who their father is depends. Sometimes it's Grimnir, sometimes it's Grugni, which of course opens the really interesting thing that Valea had children with both of them. That is canonical within the universe. It's one of those things that I would be suspicious if Games Workshop's going to keep that or not, because I think it's actually a good part of the story of the dwarves, but I could see them being like, oh, we want to change it to make it more humanish.
I really hope they don't, though, because it really does reinforce dwarf culture where the core of it is clearly matriarchal. For all it may not appear to be, given how many men are involved, it's because of the way that the number of dwarfs that are born are mostly male, meaning that the women have a very important part of their society because they are ultimately going to be responsible for keeping all of the bloodlines going, whichever ones they may go. And the concept of just simple marriage, one dwarf with another dwarf, seems to be actually ridiculous when you take a look at what their societies would be as they build up. They're a far more clan-based society where it's family groupings and clan groupings rather than individual marriages as we understand it on the human side. So one hopes that they don't try and make the dwarfs more human as they progress onwards, but don't be surprised if that happens, because you tend to find that there is almost always a steering correction back towards being human but a bit different whenever someone new steps in to try and reorganize the lore. They look at an old thing and they go, why is it like that? They just rewrite it without necessarily thinking why it was written that way in the first place, and you end up having all of these bizarre conflicts coming into place later on.
Yep. So anyway, what's interesting is that this already cracks open the first mystery, which is what defines an ancestor god.
Mhm.
Because when you're talking about the dwarfs, you are not, once again, you are talking about physical individuals who were the first of their kind that had children, who then had children, who then had children. And somewhere in this lineage, there is a cutoff point where you are an ancestor god and then you're not. And what's interesting is that depending on who you ask, whether that's writer or in-universe dwarfs, the cutoff point is in a weird place because it's not like, oh, if they're a first generation, that's the end. It happens in the midst of a generation, which is that the Valea and had a lot of children. There's quite a few of them, and not all of them become gods. The key example being Snorri Whitebeard. Snorri Whitebeard is the youngest son, according to vast majority of sources. He is the youngest son.
I wouldn't say all, though.
Yeah, not all, though. There's going to toss in other crazy things. But so you have Grugni and Valea's last son is Snorri. And he'll get the title of Whitebeard later. He doesn't start off with that title. Mm-hmm. But Snorri is a beloved son of the two of them, but he is not an ancestor god. At least he is not ever described as one and doesn't seem to be considered one by the rest of the dwarves. Because
in fact, I'll go slightly further. Not only is he not considered one, but if you go by the stories that include him, he refers to the great three ancestor gods all the time as ancestor gods. He speaks to others, for example, elves, and says things like, hey, we need to do this thing. And the elf will say something like, oh, yes, of course, you're dwarfs, aren't you? So you're doing this to respect your ancestor gods, aren't you? So by this point, Snorri is so far removed from what's effectively his parents that he's referring to them as the ancestor gods, and he is separate, completely separate. It makes very little sense if you view it in context and go, wait a minute, but that's his mum and dad. That's actually his mum and dad. This isn't something that's spoken in a way that actually makes sense. I mean, some of the stories that Games Workshop have produced, if you read them, and several of these are Gav Thorpe's ones, if you read them, you can't help but go, but wait a minute, this is mum and dad. Why isn't it being referenced more on this scale? It looks like we haven't considered the complete context of who these individuals are. But what is certain, regardless of how it's portrayed, is that Snorri is quite separate from mum and dad and is constantly referred as being separate too by himself and by others.
Yeah. Now, what's very, very interesting about Snorri in particular, when you consider the fact that his parents are ancestor gods, is that one of the things that defines for the dwarfs the end of the cataclysm is that Grugni, forewarned them that there was a storm coming, and they all had to go underground and they do all this stuff, and they survive the cataclysm, and several holds are lost, and it's bad, but they get through it. And then when, granted, that's only for if you go back and watch some of our other streams, we talk about that's only for the initial part of the cataclysm, because there are parts where they end up wandering on later and going off to do other things. We talk about that a lot in like the Chaos Dwarf stream and the Old World stream, streams, and even the Winds of Magic streams. But during that time, when the cataclysm ends, right, when the cataclysm is over and the vortex comes into being, the ancestor gods vanish. They all disappear. They wander and they go into somewhere else. There are a lot of theories, but we're not going to worry about that right now. But what's interesting is all the individuals that are considered ancestor gods, with the exception of Grimnir because he went north, go somewhere. But Snorri doesn't. Snorri stays behind, and instead is through some process that is not explicitly mentioned, becomes the first High King of the Dwarfs. And the only thing that he has from his parents is a series of artifacts where he's got the Throne of Power, which was a gift made for him by his father. That is like his big connection back to dad, is that Grugni forged this incredible throne and put the Rune of Azmar into it, which is considered one of the most powerful rune ever forged. It's so powerful that it's tied into the very destiny of the dwarfs themselves. And so long as the rune is active, the dwarfs will continue to exist. But should the rune ever be cracked or destroyed, that will symbolize the end of the dwarfs as a species, which is very ominous.
Pardon me, my TV just switched on for reasons I don't understand. Excuse me while I switch that off. I'll be back in a moment.
Sure thing. So you have this whole unique interaction here, and I'm gonna actually give Andy a moment to come back because I don't want to mention something and be like, oh, that would have been something I would have loved to talk about for a second. So hopefully you're all having a wonderful day while he's doing that real quick.
I'm back.
He's back. That was quick. With Story, we have this thing of he's got the throne from his father, which is incredibly powerful, and likely seems to indicate that he was selected to be High King before the Ancestor Gods vanished, because the Throne of Power is, of course, for the High King. So it's likely that he was either picked for this task by his parents, which is interesting, or they may have had a council that selected him as the best option. But it kind of gives the idea that the Ancestor Gods knew they were going to leave, and that the dwarfs knew they were going to leave, and that someone was going to have to stand up and be the ultimate High King, and Snorri was selected for this honor. Of course, we don't have any of the specifics. This is all very nebulous, kind of like prehistory type things.
Yeah, and it's when you read the various stories, they either reference it in a nebulous fashion, in that they say, and of course, this is when he became High King, without any description as to how it occurred. Or alternatively, they quite literally forget exactly what went down at these points, and just simply say, well, he's the first High King, isn't he? Without any reference at all to the fact that he is also the quite literal son of the gods that they had sitting out there, and his own siblings have hiked it out there to wherever it is that they went, which again, we'll almost certainly pick up in one stream or another at a later date, because there's some fascinating stuff going on down there. And I think some fascinating stuff that's worth hyping back to our old world streams. If you haven't checked how the lore has changed in our previous streams on the old world, do check it all out, because there's some big stuff that occurs here with the arrival of the Ancestor Gods to the dwarves, and then the removal of the Ancestor Gods from the dwarves, that I think is certainly worth plumbing into. And we discuss it to some length over there as well.
Yeah, so at this point, Snorri oversees... So the Ancestor Gods leave, which is a huge mystery, but there's nothing really we can add to that right now. Though we'll kind of swing around talking about some important elements.
I will say, though, that one of them leaves in a way that everyone understands, and that's Grimnir.
Yes, Grimnir leaves in a very...
in a very real way, as he hikes it north and then hikes it... and then others who obviously are aware of where he's gone, hike it south and explain what's happened as Grimnir has gone north.
Yeah, whereas the others, it literally says like they go to slumber and will return at a later time. And the dwarfs are all like, yes, of course, this they said they would, and it's an oath, so they will. We're not going to worry about it. The end. So Snorri goes on to lead the dwarves into their golden age, where the Karazankor expands dramatically, and the dwarves are incredibly powerful, and they're making all these incredible leaps in innovation and engineering and rune crafting and all this stuff. They're founding lots of holds. All the holds that are being built are growing massively in size. We have some of kind of the interesting early politics of the dwarves, which we're not going to focus a lot on this stream, which there's a lot of really early politics between Carrick 8 Peaks and Karazakarak, as opposed to which of them should be the capital, because most people don't know that Carrick 8 Peaks was the original capital, and then it gets moved to Karazakarak with the High Kings. Which is very interesting, because Valea probably wanted Carrick 8 Peaks to be the capital, but something changed, which is really interesting to think about once she was gone. But in any event, you want to add some? Or you? I'm
just going to add one small detail. It's a tiny one. That we've got also some lore conflicts in this area, which are worth highlighting, just in case you dive into any of the older lore, because you will see a clear tonal change, and that is that during this era, particularly if we rely heavily on the newest lore from the old world, this is the point where the dwarves go from being, let's say, a C student up to an A student in terms of their civilization. Where, if you go with the original lore, they go from being A+, and through Snorri's realm, stay there, and then drop. In that Snorri's time is not the time where they discover everything, it's the time where they consolidate everything that's been given to them by the Ancestor Gods. And this is where basically they expand out, already having everything. But with later lore, it's quite clear that the Ancestor Gods come along and they take these, let's say, very poor dwarves and turn them into more capable dwarves. So there is a significant difference in terms of how the lore is going to present this in different places. But the same overall story is the same. And by that, I mean, this is the golden age. And regardless of whether this is a golden age because they've moved from being in a previous, indeed, perhaps even higher tech age into this golden age. So we're moving to almost a diamond age into gold age, if you wish. Or alternatively, whether we're going from them reaching up towards being into a golden age, doesn't really matter. King Snorri, who will become through the course of this age Snorri Whitebeard as he gets older and older and older and older and oversees every single last part of the expansion. The age doesn't really matter how it came about. What matters is Snorri was overseeing the lot.
Yes. So to get into more concrete things where we actually know about things happening, funny enough, it's with the elves arriving.
It is.
The elves in this case kind of act as our grounding force, which is usually the opposite. But the elves arrive in the old world, and they are, of course, colonists essentially. But they realize that there is already a civilized force in the old world, being the dwarves. And the earliest encounters happened between Malekith and some elves that are with him, and the early dwarfs, which lead to what we can only imagine were a series of hijinks. And that eventually leads to them coming to understand one another as civilized races that can be conversed with. They're not, because those races they've encountered so far have not been super friendly, whether they be beastmen or greenskins or other such forces. And what's interesting is we kind of get a big fast forward in this, but Snorri Whitebeard, by the time that he meets Malekith, is already the Whitebeard. He's already quite old. He's a living ancestor, and he's going to go on to live for several hundred more years. Snorri is old, like very old. And when you look at, I don't think it's directly stated anywhere how long he ends up living, but compared to modern day dwarfs, he lives for an incredibly long time.
Yep.
Like well over 1,000 years, maybe even several. We don't know because we have no idea when he was born. But he lives for an incredibly long time because by the time him and Malekith meet, he's already quite old, and the two of them end up becoming very, very fast friends. Because what's interesting about Snorri is that he is not... Snorri is a typical dwarf, as you and I would think of it, but the dwarves have not gone through the horrible betrayal yet of the War of Vengeance. They have not gone through the collapsing of the Age of Woe. So the dwarves of this era, with Snorri leading them, are a much more, bizarrely as it may be to think, are a much more positive force in the world, much more likely that if someone makes a promise to them or someone swears an oath to them, they will take them at face value. Because from their experiences, those are binding. And the initial elves that they meet, Malekith being one of them, holds to their oaths, at least for quite some time.
In fact, I'll go further. It's not just that from their experience they are binding and that this is their culture. They have already got an established dwarf culture where the concept of an oath is a thing. And when an oath is given, it is seen through. It is as simple as that. And oaths are extremely important. I would argue pretty strongly that oaths are at the heart of all dwarf culture. Completely at the heart of it, because once an oath is sworn, it will be seen through. Indeed, we've seen multiple periods in dwarf history where an oath is sworn and that dwarf won't die until the oath is seen through. Oaths are more than just words, much more than words. Oaths mean something to dwarves on a literal fundamental level. So simply swearing an oath is not, oh, he swore an oath, let's see this through, as the elves perceive it. They just see it as a promise. And promises with the elves are frequently broken because elves are a very political species that realize that you move from one thing to the next thing and reality changes according to the circumstances you're in. An oath from yesterday may no longer apply because circumstances have changed. Elves are adaptable in that way, in a way that dwarfs simply are not, which is why oaths are so important, because they only swear them when they are certain, and they expect others to be the same as themselves. So they expect, particularly in this early period, that if you swear an oath, that is it. There is no coming back, because that's how their culture, and I'd go further, it's not just their culture, the entire spirituality is everything that it is to be dwarfy. That's how it manifests, which inevitably is going to cause a little bit of trouble here as we progress onwards.
Yeah, and that delves into something we've talked about in prior episodes when we talked about slayers, where if you violate an oath, I mean, that can not only can that just fuck up your afterlife forever, for eternity, but it can also ruin that of your ancestors as well. Like, it can reach backwards into time to affect your entire lineage. That's how huge these are, which is really important to understand for where the story is going to go. So Snorri Whitebeard, he's one of those characters that it's always a delight to see him appear in a story. He shows up in a lot of flashbacks. If you read through like the Malekith trilogy or the War of Vengeance trilogy, there are a number of scenes that involve him because he's critical to what goes down in those stories. In that we've talked about way back in the Malekith stream, which I think was like the first or second episode of Lorebeards that we did of this new format.
You're getting Whitebeard.
Yeah, I know. But if you go back to that, you'll know that Malekith there is a profound relationship between Malekith and Snorri that we do not have the time to express in deep enough terms how incredible their friendship is, to where friendship feels like a hilariously not appropriate word to use for how deep it is.
Yeah, absolutely. These are brothers in arms. There are as many stereotypes for how that is used in various stories and novels. Apply them all, because you're almost certainly going to be there. And they are clearly aware of their differences. They know. And they are often, whenever you see them popping up in various stories, referencing their differences. Oh, your people think this, or your people think that. But there's always this sort of underpinning amount of humor. And when the one party or the other party goes away, the other, let's say, Malekith pops off, having just spoken to Snorri Whitebeard. The other dwarves are like, well, they're weird, aren't they? And Snorri will say something on the lines of, yes, they are, but that's what they're like. There's an understanding between the two of them that is normally completely pushed away when we discuss dwarves and elves. They fit. And again, I can't stress enough here, because it was clearly iterated, but I'm going to re-stress it, that Snorri by this point could be older than pretty much anyone that Malekith knows. Because it's possible that he was sired way back deep before even the Cataclysm. He is possibly proper ancient by this point. So don't think of Snorri Whitebeard as like a couple of 100 years old, maybe even verging on his first 1,000, like a Crag the Grim type figure, having reached that point. No, he is at this point already a living ancestor. He is probably ancient. And this is something that works very well with elves, because Malekith is also surrounded by a lot of ancient folks, but worse, most of them have died. And in some respects, he's almost looking for a figure who can replace his dead dad, who can also replace all of the dead elves. And we have a truly ancient dwarf who remembers the times before. So even though the stories don't necessarily delve into you know what? Yeah, my mom and dad are gods. And you know what? I remember the time of the old ones. And you know what? All of this is true. This is almost certainly something that happened. Malekith and Snorri have got stuff to discuss, because Snorri has got tales to tell, and Malekith is desperate to hear of the times from before, of the times of his mum, of the time of where his dad was born out of. This is clearly, there's more to this relationship than is immediately obvious. Now, in time, as the years go by, it turns into a very close, almost fraternal relationship. To begin with, it very much looks like it would be a paternal relationship, almost like a father figure over a son. And this, in terms of where it ends and the last point, is super important, because Snorri knows what Malekith's failings are, absolutely knows. And as we're about to move on to, is going to call it out.
Yeah, it is actually very interesting to think about the bonds between the two of them, especially of like, they are the only two individuals they know of in the world who's both of them, at least one of their parents is literally a god. And they can relate on that level, and that they're both mortal. Like Snorri, one of the things that's very interesting about Snorri is, despite the fact that he is ancient, he's dying very slowly, but he's getting old. He's getting slower. He's getting more tired, and he's aware of it, and it annoys him, but he just approaches it with typical dwarf stoicism.
And interestingly as well, on the other side, Malekith also knows this. And Malekith is the one who actually comforts Snorri. Malekith is the one who says, look, Snorri, all things come to an end. It is about the great deeds that you have done. It is about how you will be remembered. It's about everything that builds from what you have built. You will live on in so many different ways because even elves eventually die. Malekith at this point knows that he's looking at potentially, should he survive the various conflicts that he's constantly involved with, he knows that he's looking at potentially thousands of years of life, which is really interesting to look at when you look at how elves are often aged in various books. But at this point, let's make it as clear as we possibly can. We have a dwarf who's probably at least 1,000 years, and the elf is freely admitting he will easily outlive him. That in and of itself is a fascinating aspect to how long elves actually think they're going to live, regardless of how some books might say centuries. Yes, maybe 1,000 years, they're beginning to get old. No, not according to Malekith. He comes from the original set of elves. As far as he's concerned, he's just going to go on until eventually he falls. Yeah. That's it. He's not immortal, because he can die and they can eventually fade, but he comes from the era of elves when it's high magic and the vortex has not turned them into something arguably different, as magic sucked from the world. He believes he's going to live forever, and so does Snorri. And their relationship at the end is super fascinating. Just one last aspect before we move on to other bits. It's also worth noting what they're doing during this time, because they are literally comrades at arms. The elves have met the dwarves. The elves are populating throughout the old world and colonizing everywhere else as well. The dwarves are keeping the high mountains, and they are going around the world kicking ass and chewing gum. There is a host of bad guys that need to be sorted after the cataclysm. There are pockets of beastmen, mutants, demons even. Great swirls of magic that the dwarves themselves are not necessarily well equipped to deal with. The huge creatures, mighty dragons, by the way, that Malekith himself has mastered and rides, because he rides in on a mighty golden dragon multiple times because, he's Malekith. He literally can't help himself. This is an interesting combination of powers where the elves and the dwarves, although they don't necessarily understand each other, have a bridge, between them with these two exceedingly important characters. And they have been fighting back to back for years.
For centuries. Malekith, the story, are out there fighting. There's actually, especially if you read, I think it's the War of Vengeance trilogy, there are some flashback scenes that are fantastic that literally show them fighting greater demons and other sets of big horrors and things like that. There's also a book that's part of I want to say it's the Dwarf Omnibus, the Oaths of Stone and Steel book that is about kind of like a War of Vengeance Part 2 Electric Boogaloo that also has flashback scenes of the two of them fighting great beastman hordes and stuff like that. But so you have all this stuff happening, and eventually Snorri gets old to the point that his body is failing him and he no longer can march out into the battle, and he's bedridden. And Malekith, and this is after they've already been victorious. They've purged the old world of many of the great threats. The Greenskins have been pushed out in into the Darklands and like the far jungles of the Southlands. The Beastmen have retreated into the absolute depths of the forest. The dwarves have conquered the entirety of the World's Edge Mountains and even beyond. Many of the dwarves have started to move into the hills of what we now know as the Empire because they're looking for new lands. The elves have conquered all of the coastlands and have started to move into the forest themselves. So everything's great. Life's perfect, but Snorri is dying.
And the first High King of the Dwarves is coming to an end. Sad times.
Which for the dwarves is traumatic, to say the least. But Malekith, we talked about, was somewhere else. He comes back from campaign, and he rushes to Snorri's side, and Snorri chooses to share his last moments, not with his wife, not with any descendants of his, not with his sons and daughters, but with his closest friend Malekith, because he understands that Malekith is key to this golden age lasting.
Yep.
It is all in his hands. And Snorri knows that. That's why he hangs on until Malekith can come see him. And the two of them have a talk where Snorri probably would have died before here if he did not have this need to have this oath he's about to say spoken. Like, he's suffering. He's ready to die. It's his time. But he refuses to let death have him until he can talk to Malekith. And when Malekith finally arrives, they talk, and Snorri says to him, I need you to swear to me on the deepest. You understand oaths in my culture. Like, you and I have talked many long nights. We've shared many drinks. We've shared many myths and many stories. You understand. I need you to swear to me that you will do everything in your power to uphold what we have built. And Malekith, understanding what this means, swears it.
Yeah. And Snorri's clear. He says, you know what I think of Oathbreakers. You know what this means. You understand that by swearing that you will uphold everything that we have worked to build, that you will maintain this. You know, if you break this oath, it is the most awful and terrible thing you can do. And he makes it super clear. Super, super, super clear. And of course, Malekith agrees and indeed swears.
Yeah, what we get into in a minute, this is not a situation where like Malekith signed a bargain, not understanding the fine print. Malekith deeply understands everything that he's agreeing to. But he's an elf, which means that circumstances will change. And that's what happens. Snorri dies. There's, a whole thing where he's laid to rest and yada yada. New High King is selected, all this stuff.
I think actually it's worth dropping in a little bit of extra detail here, because it is worth focusing on. When he is laid to rest, he's not just simply dropped off into some cavern somewhere where he is, corpse bundled in. We're done. And you go, you're slapping in there into an old, effectively a mausoleum of sorts. And we'll carve a quick Snorri on top. Drop in some runes. We're done. Yeah, no. Because Snorri has already given a particularly big oath himself by this point, which I think we should go on to detail too.
Yes.
And once he has sworn said oath, and once he has had his last words with Malekith, and once he has very clearly got Malekith to swear to uphold effectively this great golden age that they have built together, he then dies. He has finally come to peace with the world. He has done everything that he promised, presumably to his parents, that he would do. He has long lasted beyond his normal mortal years, and he is at peace. But clearly he's written it down that should this oath be broken, then vengeance will be mine. And throughout all of his tomb, he has the greatest runesmiths of his era spang in enormous magical runes of vengeance. And indeed, the whole idea of nothing will keep him down, because he has sworn already. In fact, I'll let you do the sweary oath part if you want, because you do like your dwarves.
Well, yeah, so Snorri has his tomb is one of those things that I would love to see someone take a crack, like a really good artist take a crack at what it would look like. Of that, you have this massive tomb that's got just runic script 360 all around it. That he delves. Snorri, you could tell he was not comfortable with the idea of dying and leaving the world without his axe, should it have need of it. In that he basically kind of pulls the classic, should this event come to pass, which I hope it won't, but if it does, I will return as a literal, I will do everything in my power to not stay at rest, and vengeance will be had upon everyone ever that is responsible, and I shall never rest again.
Indeed, I've just pulled it up just so I've got it, because it's always nice to pull this bit. So Snorri, he's dying, and he knows he's dying, and his body used to be as strong as the stone itself, and it's now weak, and he understands it. And he's accepting that he's about to move on to the halls of his ancestors, which, let's be blunt, aren't the halls of his ancestors. They're the halls of his mom and dad. And he says that he's almost looking forward to it. And Malekith is popping in going, yep, you'll be welcomed there by Valea and Grimnir, because Malekith totally understands, and you will take your place beside them in pride. And then he goes, I'm not done, said Snorri with a frown, his expression grim. The king continued, hear this oath, Malekith of the elves, comrade on the battlefield, friend of the hearth. I, Snorri Whitebeard, High King of the Dwarves, bequeath my title and rights to my eldest son. Though I pass through the gateway to the halls of the ancestors, my eyes shall remain upon my empire. Interesting that he uses the word empire, I think. particularly given the influence that the dwarves will have later upon the Empire.
Yeah.
Let it be known to our allies and our enemies that the death is not the end of my guardianship. At this point, he coughs and he's really very ill, obviously. And Malekith looking on with some concern because Malekith literally is not a dick. Vengeance shall be mine, swore Snorri. When our foes are great, I shall return to my people. Then the foul creatures of the world be at the doors of Karazakarak. I shall take up my axe once more, and in my ire shall rock the mountains. Heed my words, Malekith of Ulthuan, and heed them well. Great have been our deeds, and great is the legacy that I leave to you, my closest confidant, my finest comrade in arms. We were trying to stress how important this relationship. This is over all dwarves. The elf is his mate. Just make sure it is clear in your head. And that's when he then goes on to because he's looking for the further oath, swear to me now, as my dying breath fills my lungs, that my oath has been heard. Swear to it on my grave, on my spirit, that you shall remain true to the ideals we have both striven for these many years. Now, there is a reason he's doing this, because he knows that elven hearts are flighty. He understands Malekith probably better than anyone else in the world.
He tried so hard to ground him in this moment.
And he's basically his dad. It's his dad.
Yeah.
Okay. And he's saying, son, we have built the world together. You are my best mate. We rock. Please don't tear it down once I'm gone in your grief. Please don't do that wrong. You are the best that the world can offer. You should be king. You are the son of a god. I know you because I am you. You and me, we're bros. So please don't cock this up. Because if you do, my other oath, it is not a small oath. This is important, and you must understand how important because you understand what I am. And that's why when we move on to the next section, you realize Snorri had a backup plan because at his instruction, the casket, his casket, had been carved with dire runes of vengeance and grudge bearing by the most powerful rune lords of the hold, inlaid with gold, literally suffused with magical light. As it's literally pooling in magical sign as Snorri is lowered in, as the big lid, the big stone lid is dropped over the top. Massive bound gold bands are put in place and covered with more runes as rune lords come in unison and start doing more sigils of vengeance, more sigils of hatred, should anyone dare ever cross this particular oath. So deep was it. And then as he's slowly consigned to the halls of the ancestors, there's a great crescendo of drums as all the rune lords are there, chanting away in their great, let's say, grief at the passing of their king. So let's be under no illusions. Malekith was fully aware of what he was swearing into, and Snorri was equally fully aware of who Malekith was. And should Malekith not see his oath through, then he would certainly return. But further, should just the dwarfs reach the point where the capital is threatened, again, he will return because his job is not done. Whatever oath he swore to his parents is now being resworn again in many respects to ensure that the dwarves continue. And he quite clearly will return.
Yep.
Yeah.
And we will get
Super
into
chat time.
That return after Super Chats. Yep.
Super chat time.
So, no, we did catch your thing, Alan. Thank you again for that. Sean Schultz, if the white dwarf is a spirit, would the Kislev Hagmother know and talk to him as Norse dwarfs are nearby? Honestly, it's possible. Right.
So I'm going to answer this slightly differently. So the word spirit means so much in Warhammer, and it's such a loose umbrella term. Yeah. So gods could be included in that. That's a little bit like saying, you know, if Khorne is a spirit, does that mean the Kislev Hagmother chats to Khorne? And I think the answer to that is, you know what? Yeah, nah.
Probably not. Yeah, probably not.
There's different levels of the term spirit, and sometimes the word spirit is not best deployed. But when it comes to dwarfs and their afterlife and the way that their spirits can return, particularly when oaths are broken or when their life was not complete, because dwarfs have obviously got their own versions of the undead going on with their ghosts and their spirits. We are in quite a different place to the spirits of the land, the great elemental creatures that are being spun up by the hag mother, or indeed any of the hags that come alongside them.
Yeah. Now, what I will add is there potentially a story somewhere where there are some Norskin dwarfs or just some dwarfs that have been passing through the Kislev Heartlands and have had an encounter with Mother Ostankya only to be saved by Grombrindal, and there was an interaction between these two ancient spirit entities? Entities is a better word in this case.
Entities.
Yes, that has almost assuredly happened. Because especially when you consider how much Ostankya seems to heavily lean on the concept of maintaining your word and not, following the laws, these like great unwritten laws, there is definitely some interactions that can happen between the two of them, of Grombrindal being like, you can't have these ones. They didn't break any rules because of this. And Ostankya being like, all right, they can leave, but they need to leave now.
And I can just see him sitting there looking at her going, come on.
Yeah. And Mother Ostankya being like, yeah, no, I don't want a piece of that. Yeah. So there's definitely a story there. Jack Flanagan. Alternatively, I will say, if you want to flip it and have fun with it, there's also a story of Grombrindal warning some dwarfs that are going into Ostankya's woods about what not to do. And if they don't heed his wisdom, that's on them.
Yeah, and I think that this is worth it. We'll detail this in a little bit of time because the white dwarf, Grombrindal, is often ignored.
Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
He's the unfortunate seer character sometimes. Jeff Flanagan. Hey, Andy, it's Sotek. Thanks for the podcast. I feel like my own writing has improved just by listening to you two. Have to work in an attic today. Oh, that sucks.
Well, good luck with the work up there. I hope it's not too onerous.
Yep. Take lots of water breaks. Commander Bone. Hi. This time, not so late question. How would Grombrindal react to Rupesh the Third of the Tomb Kings? Would he smite him or help him discover his Dawi roots? Honestly, I don't think the dwarves. I think if the dwarves encountered Rupesh, they would probably be there'd be some confliction between them, but I think once they actually talk to him, as weird as this may sound, I think they would kind of leave him alone. Kind of like how when Gotrek encounters Rupesh, and Gotrek kind of knows what Rupesh is, but he doesn't really deal with it because it's kind of such an uncomfortable situation that if their goal is not to destroy Rupesh, which would be probably the correct thing to do, it would be just leave him. Just leave him.
You tend to find with later dwarves, if not necessarily early dwarves, which is currently where we're kicking around in our timeline, they are so overloaded with various, let's say, terrible betrayals. Their hearts are so filled with ensuring that their grudges are resolved, alongside their desperate desire to just hike it over to their own shed and tinker away at their own stuff, whatever their individual character needs are, that a thing that lies beyond the horizon is quite beyond them. Has it crossed me? No. Is it in front of me? No. I've got my own problems. And they are often much more insular than many people realize. But that doesn't necessarily mean that if there was a crossing, that there wouldn't be something that would come out from that. But I just can't see that happening in this particular instance.
Yeah, especially because Rupesh, he's a proper Tomb King. He doesn't leave unless it's to, defend Liberus from some kind of threat. For those who are wondering who Rupesh is, he is a kind of a Moses joke figure. Where he was a baby dwarf that was literally put in a basket and sent down a mountain river and was taken in by the people of Liberus and became a great mighty Tomb King. That was of unusual stature. The Singe Master, any relation?
Definitely a choice by the writers.
Yeah, the Singe Master, Meister, any relation between Snorri and Carrick Zorn? Yes, 100%. Carrick Zorn was proud and strong during the time of Snorri Whitebeard, and likely had incredible amounts of wisdom that were fully accessed to him. The fall of Carrick Zorn does not happen until a little bit before the War of Vengeance, which is way later.
Yep.
So yeah, they were around for a good while. Muffin Baskets. I understand that spoken Khazalid is depicted to have a northern accent with harsh those sounds. But shouldn't the Khazalid tongue be dwarfs yodeling in the mountains and caves using echoing effects?
I mean, you could argue that if you wish to do so, why not do so for your own game? But the dwarfs are written by people who have broadly placed the accents that they write with as Northern English accents almost exclusively. And when you go into the Scottish, which is very common for many people in other settings for using their dwarfs, they give them Scottish accents. You tend to find that that is viewed as somewhat of a weird northern accent for the dwarfs that lies beyond. Indeed, it would look at, like, say, Malachi Malakson, who's quite clearly got a Scottish accent. And that accent is marked as expressly different to what the standard dwarfs have. And whenever someone is asked to voice act dwarfs, it's almost always with an E by gum northern accent. So regardless of what it should be, regardless of what it may manifest as in a real Warhammer world, there is no such thing. It's made up.
Keep in mind, the Empire should have German accents, and yet they're British. So
yet they're all British. So you'll find that no matter what may make sense, Muffin Baskets, the actuality of how it expresses in the Warhammer world is Yorkshire and all of the various other northern accents that sit around it, for you to try and pull apart for the different accents for each of the holds.
Yeah, that being said, kind of an interesting thing as far as like the yodeling thing is concerned, it would probably depend on the dwarfs. Like if you're dealing with dwarf rangers, dwarfs that are in the open mountains, they would probably use those kinds of forms of communication where they speak to communicate over very long distances and take advantage of echoing. In the depths, dwarfs tend to actually rely on using more Klinkerune of like they use tapping against the rock because dwarfs are so sensitive that they can, by pressing their ears to the rock or just feeling it through their feet or their hands, they can feel dwarfs communicating by using certain kinds of basically Morse code over incredible distances, which they've adapted because you don't want to shout in the depths because things will hear you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they communicate typically through the rock because those are things that Skaven and goblins cannot pick up on.
Yeah, and I do think it's fascinating because I broadly agree with you. I mean, if I consider, here's a random Andy piece of lore, where I came from at the very north of Scotland, there was a lot of fishing communities up there that were hundreds of years old, going all the way back to trade with Amsterdam. I came from the very north of Scotland, at least. I grew a good chunk of time up there. And before that, there was trade with Norway and elsewhere, all the way back to when we're back in like in the 900s or whatever. The communities here were ancient and they maintained a host of bizarre, what I felt were bizarre when I grew older and looked at nobody else did this, traditions. One of which was calling, where someone would just do single notes like, oh, or ooh, and all the kids did this because they were often multiple miles apart. And you would hear when someone was, for example, coming out to play, there'd be a quick call that would go out. And wherever you were, because it was an open bay, you could hear it echoing between the cliffs. This, however, in no way impacted accent, in no way impacted words used. It was just a part of the local culture. And this was relatively common across the north of Scotland and apparently over into the islands to the north as well, where all of the kids did this. But when they were adults, they stopped doing it. But apparently, just 50 years earlier, they hadn't stopped. The adults were doing it too, but it got replaced over time with telephones because that's just better. So just to do one odd reply to your one, just because you might have a yodeling part of their calling, it doesn't necessarily mean that it would impact their accents at all.
Yeah, I also love the idea that dwarf children would use the yodeling thing, but dwarf adults would instead rely on other more stealthy methods because they're like, no, that's ridiculous. That's too noisy.
Good times.
Because that would actually make dwarf children more like children, which is something that a lot of writers don't bother with.
They're only important once their beards are fully in.
Yep. Valley Valison, Story of Malekith, the Campfire Stories. I would not mind reading that book. Yeah, I will say one of the biggest beefs I have with Games Workshop, it's just the nature of what they are, is that it would be so nice if Black Library had more kind of like slice of life type stories or stories that were not focused around battles.
Actually, I'm not just going to agree with this. It was something because obviously sometimes we prep up for streams because sometimes we can't remember necessarily all the lore straight into our minds. And in this one, the only one that I bothered reading up again was the story in White Dwarf number 300. All the rest of it, I reckon I could probably remember because that story was a nice snapshot of how we got our first real Grombrindal. And I was like, I'll go refresh myself in that because I remember reading it. And do I remember all the details? I remember most of them. But the important part of that was when I read it, I just sighed heavily because it was such a typical Games Workshop story. Now, I don't mean this as in any way an attack on the author. In fact, it's the opposite, because the authors are constrained by the needs of what Warhammer wants.
Yeah.
They have to write certain types of stories. It's what they're asked to do. But the story was basically detail 1, detail 2, detail 3. That leads to a battle. Here's the battle, and here's a long page description of the various troops that are in that battle. Here's our Thunderers, here's our Halberdiers, here's our various troops doing their various things, with a quick description of each type of troop in full capitals for the name of each one, even though these are just Empire soldiers with, say, halberds. No, they're capitalized Halberdiers, because that's part of their army. So going through the various cell sheet as they go through the troops that you get in that army, and then you get yourself your big battle. Then we hit some sort of conclusion point where everyone says, well, you should have listened to me. The end. And at the end of it, I was like, oh, it's just another freaking Warhammer story. And so many of them follow the same model. Here's situation 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that leads to this battle. Here's all the troops at the battle. Let's have ourselves a big battle. The end. And it becomes tiresome if you're attempting to read through them at any rate, because it's almost a copy-paste template. And I cannot agree enough that there is a complete lack of what it's like to actually live in the world. Now, some of the older books did this much better. And this is why many of the older books, like Drachenfels or whatever, all the way back into the late 80s and early 90s, many of these older books are really, really well regarded by the people who read them first time round, because they were actual stories in the Warhammer world, rather than being build-ups to fights. And to finish off on my side here, one of the biggest issues I had when I was working with building up toward doing backgrounds book for Black Library was that immediate commandment. It must follow this. And I was like, yeah, but that weakens the narratives and the storytelling, particularly for some of the Phoenix Kings, where their narrative is times of peace and how that peace manifested. I want to discuss that and provide context for why the times of war were so horrible. I want to do the contest. No, focus on the fighting. And it almost made all of the Phoenix Kings look like copy-paste versions of each other. So I was somewhat trepidatious of that, but I would just like to say, yeah, what Sotek said.
Yeah,
listen
and that's
to that.
why, like one of the best books we ever got for dwarfs is Grudgelord, because it's focused on the background. It's not really focused on the fights. Like, granted, there's a little bit of information about fights, but very little. It's mostly just about background fluff, which is why it's like sacred to dwarf fans.
Yeah, I helped work in that book. Good times.
Yeah, it's a good book.
Yep, good book.
Let's see. So Grombrindal is the Warhammer Fantasy Battle Ghost Rider. You're not wrong. He's not that, but he's not.
There are certain
similar
qualities.
Yeah. Jonathan Scott, the existence of a white dwarf for the Dawi implies the existence of a black dwarf for the Dawi Czar. If that's true, what's the black dwarf's lore? There is a black dwarf, but he's not what you think he is. Oh yeah, look, someone brought him up. There's a black dwarf and white dwarf article 201-200. He has a magic anvil that grants him invulnerability unless it's destroyed. Yeah, no, the opposite of the white dwarf is actually kind of the black goblin, who we'll talk about later because I know there's a question about him. But funny enough, the black goblin is actually not really part of Grombrindal's lore. He has more to do with Grom the Paunch. Funny enough. Still loading. Good day. Does Grom appear like the Sword of Cain? Oh, and that he changes depending on who's looking at him?
That's interesting. No, he doesn't, but to a degree.
Not to that extent. To
a degree, sort of does.
Yeah, it's better to say he appears as appropriate for the context as opposed to the individual looking at him. But like all the dwarfs that are present would see him the same, but he would be appropriate for that context. As opposed to the Sword of Cain, which if you had a bunch of elves in a room, it would look different to each individual elf because it's trying to tempt them. Watchdog, how do you think Malekith reacted to Snorri pulling the same transformation as his father? Oh, of turning into like a weird... Well, you have to remember, Malekith didn't know Anarion before he was God Anarion. Malekith only knew his father as Anarion, who's part Cain, part Ashuran, little teeny tiny part elf in between those two. He never knew the true Anarion, so to speak, only through stories, which once again would probably be something he would value a lot from hearing from Snorri about what it was like to know what these individuals were like before they were gods. Mandatus, the Doom of... Oh, thank you. Fresh cookie. Thank you. The Doom of Dragonback had a nice slice of life startup. I do love that book. Yes, Doom of Dragonback it builds up to a big battle, but it's almost more of a horror theme. which works so well for like Doom of Dragonback is my recommended go-to book if you want to see the Greenskins as what they should be, which is an absolutely fucking horrifying force of nature. They're not goofy, they're just terrifying. And it's because it's from a slice of life format. It's not, oh, let's go out and have this big epic battle at the end of the novel. It's how are we going to survive this fucking nightmare?
Yeah.
And the slice of life builds up to that much better.
And I cannot recommend that those books are, generally speaking, the better ones. You tend to find that many of them obviously are focusing upon whatever the narrative at hand might be, and they just miss the different context that the Warhammer world offers for each one of the different civilizations, species, whatever, factions that are present, and they're just nothing more than a vehicle for the battle that comes at the end. And when that story is being more service to try and speak to all the different things that make these cultures fascinating, they are always the ones that, at least from my perspective, I enjoy most.
Yeah. Let's see. Need a Grombrindal versus Ostenkia court battle. Calling it a court battle is a little over the top hilarious, but I think that would actually make for an appropriate short story, is watching a dwarf stumbling, or a group of dwarves stumbling through the Kislev wilds, but you have like a secret discussion happening in the background between Grombrindal and Ostenkia of discussing what they're doing and whether or not they have violated the laws. That actually, I think, if you've ever seen like DC Comics where they have like a kind of like a god tier battle between like, oh, what are those characters, like the Spirit of Vengeance superhero guy and then like the Stranger, like the two of them talking while they're watching like Batman do something like that would be actually very appropriate for those characters, I think.
Yep, I agree.
Anyway, back into the story of Grombrindal. So fast forward thousands of years, Malekith the Witch King, soon to be Malarian the Dread King, TM, goes on to, he does his big epic betrayal, right? Which granted, I do like, I don't think the original authors intended this, but the way the story is told later can be interpreted as this, what I love. Malekith genuinely uses the dwarves as a last reaction. It is not something he pulled on immediately for the Sundering. It's not something he even pulled on in like the immediate aftermath. It's something that he pulled on much, much later as kind of a Hail Mary pass to try and weaken Ulthuan enough for him to attack it. And it should have worked, to his credit, if it hadn't been for a couple of little extra circumstances. But in any event, he leads this big situation which causes the War of Vengeance. Yep. And this is the trigger, because according to the more modern lore, which talks about Grombrindal in the sense of understanding that Snorri Whitebeard is who he actually is, Grombrindal's first ever appearance is during the War of Vengeance.
Yep. And no matter which version of who is Grombrindal you go with, and it's Snorri Whitebeard, regardless of which version you go with, his first appearances are always during the War of Vengeance, or the War of the Beard, if you must. And it's quite clear that the stories are designed to support the fact that it's Snorri, because this is the point when quite clearly, not only is Karaz-a-Karak under threat from the foes of the dwarves, the very fact that it's dwarves facing off against elves, the very world that they built was those two people working together. The oath is clearly broken, and it was broken by Malekith on purpose, because he was seeking an end that he felt was best for his people. And as we have discussed on multiple occasions, elves don't view oaths in the same way that dwarves do, but dwarves do. And from Malekith's perspective, he was doing what he considered to be best. It's very easy to turn them all into cackling bad guys, particularly because when it comes to the Dark Elves, Games Workshop often portray them as cackling bad guys. But particularly at this era of them, they are just elves. And these are the elves of the north, those who were at war for centuries against Chaos, Beastmen, the rest, and have watched themselves have the good old other high elves turn their back on them. Because the other elves, high elves, not even elves, the other elves, who are peace-loving elves, so to speak, particularly the inner kingdom elves, rather than the outer kingdom ones, just don't like what the Nagarai elves in the north have become. And they see this as the only way forward, because they believe that they should be continuing the fight against Chaos, they should be working together, and the other elves do not. And in some respects, you could even argue that Malekith is attempting to continue his oath with Snorri, which is they have to keep themselves ready for the great enemy that lies beyond, and they have to keep on fighting. They have to keep on moving. They have to effectively continue what he and Snorri had started. That is the whole point. And in some respects, I can clearly see Malekith has come to this conclusion. The only way I can keep my oath is to do this. And I don't like turning Malekith into a cackling bad guy, because to do so is to undermine the character that he was and the character that he is supposed to eventually become in the end times. So it's far better to look at Malekith and go, what was the incredibly hard choice he had to make? And the hard choice he had to make was, I have this oath, and the only way I can maintain it is to potentially break it. And it just goes out of control, because I'm not going to say that the War of the Beard, the War of Vengeance, is what he wanted per se, but it's what he got. And it was enough to break the oath.
Yeah, what's interesting, I love that we'll talk about more later, because when you talk about Grombrindal, you have to talk about the way it should have ended. The idea that Malekith deep down is saying to himself, and would say to Grombrindal when he should have encountered him later, would be, this was the only way I could see forward. Like, I had to do this in order to put myself at the top so that I could protect the world. So I had to be Phoenix King. I had to do this to maintain the fight against chaos. And Grombrindal saying, then you should have chosen to die. Like, this was you. It doesn't matter what your end goal was. What matters is how you accomplished it, and you violated the promise you made to me.
And that's the difference between elves and dwarves. Dwarves see categorical oaths, where elves don't. Elves see the reality of the situation that they're in and changing it. Now, again, just to make sure we're clear, I'm not saying Malekith, he's actually, great. That's not the point of this. There's nothing to do with good guys and bad guys here. What we've got here is elves and dwarfs and how they perceive the world. And we really want to characterize each of the species for who they are. And this gives you a complicated, proper story for what Malekith is, rather than just simply cackling away, or he's influenced by chaos, or his mum is evil, or whatever other options you want to go for. This is some deep, difficult choices that this particular character is going for, choices that will send him over the edge into creating the Dark Elf society that stands, and I will make this relatively clear, as a bastion against chaos to the north. They continue their war. They go into the north and they post up towers down the length of the realm of chaos to hold off against it in the way that the elves in the south have refused to do. They continue the war. The elves fall to indolence. We all know what happens with the high elves. The high elves become, if anything, a completely inward-looking people who all they're concerned with is keeping the high seas, where the dark elves, they fight bitterly to the end. And in some respects, you can see that as the influence of Snorri Whitebeard upon Malekith. That fight has to continue. The fight that was started by their parents can never end, because if you let it end, they will win. So the Dark Elves continue that fight, Dark Elves, where the High Elves give up. And they fall into indolence. They fall into all manner of different issues that the High Elves face. But they are the good guys. The Dark Elves are the bad guys. There are no good guys and bad guys. There's just different ways to solve problems in front of everyone. So I wouldn't like anyone out there looking at this going, you're trying to spin Malekith as a good guy here. No, I'm trying to spin Malekith as a complicated character. Someone who's not just a black and white cackling bad guy. That actually.
It's like, don't get it twisted. Malekith was sending out orders for Dark Elves to pretend to be other people and murder innocent dwarves. Like, it's evil as fuck, but
it totally is.
He believes that it's worth it for what he's trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I think as a last comment on that, nobody is a bad guy in their own heart. And if you, as a writer, have written someone to be a cackling bad guy, you should perhaps take a step back and go, what can I do to make this character more believable? And that's ultimately what you're looking for with someone like Malekith, who should be complicated. And by this point, old and complicated.
Yeah, so we're going to take Malekith and we're going to throw him in the corner. We'll come back to him in a little bit, but he's going to sit over there for a minute. So Grombrindal goes on to become a legend at this point because a mysterious white dwarf starts appearing at several battles against the High Elves and unleashing just horrific carnage when he appears. but he always appears to save the dwarfs in a bad situation, but not always. He can't be everywhere at once. One of the things that's easy to misunderstand about Grombrindal is, because he's often referred to as a spirit of vengeance, is that he has a physical form. He has a physical presence. And while he's able to kind of pull a Batman where he can like very suddenly appear and very suddenly disappear, he cannot teleport. Yeah. Grombrindal is very, very explicitly shown to move at a fairly quick pace, but still a achievable pace by a mortal. He is not able to just show up wherever he needs to be. Otherwise, clearly he would have, just been at every battle, right? But he only shows up at a couple of key battles. And one of the things that's important is that, and you actually, if you read novels that involve Grombrindal himself bitches about this, that he can't be everywhere he needs to be. And he often arrives late sometimes, where he'll show up and be like, damn it, if only I'd been here like 2 hours earlier.
Indeed, the very first story in White Dwarf 300, where they're clearly taking the cart in a different direction, expressly has that happen, where somebody dies because he couldn't get there in time. And a prince in this particular case. And that is, I think, an important aspect of the cart to consider here. He is someone who pops up where he's needed most. Arguably a spirit, if you wish to do so. He's quite physical. He has to figure out what the best option is for the fight. He eventually reveals himself, and when he reveals himself, holy fucksticks, is he impressive. That big, long, flowing white beard, which immediately marks him out as an ancestor. Remember, dwarves age slowly. To get a pure white beard means that you are a living ancestor. That is very rare. So he reveals that enormous white beard, all the gold clasps holding it in place, the mighty runic axe, a freaking crown, and all the rest of it. The dude is not somebody who can be expressed as anything other than an ancient dwarf hero. And the sight of him becomes legendary as he appears at different points during the conflict, going from one place to another where he's needed most. Now, I don't think that we should say that he is responsible for ensuring that the dwarfs win that war.
Oh, yeah, no.
But I will say that if he hadn't been there, they may have lost.
That's fair. Yeah, and Grombrindal, the best thing to think about with Grombrindal is that he tends to be a character of far-reaching consequence as opposed to immediate consequence, where he's not often going to be the character that shows up to save... he didn't save High King Godric Starbreaker's son from being killed by the Phoenix King Calor II, which is a situation where you're like, oh, that would have been very convenient had he been there. Instead, he's going to save a group of dwarfs who are in a bad situation, often through no consequence of their own. It's not their fault. And he is saving them from just raw garbage luck, often.
Yeah.
And often... to be frank, because he's a spirit of vengeance, he usually, unfortunately, isn't going to save people. It's usually that he shows up just in time to get somebody's last words, or they had an oath. They had, like, one of my favorite stories involving Grombrindal is that there's a story about, I think it actually shows up in the Warhammer Online Age of Vengeance series of stories, where there's a dwarf character who's carrying a package. He's got a runic item or some item that belongs to his clan, and he has sworn an oath to get this item to a particular place. But while he's traveling, he gets ambushed by goblins and mortally wounded, and he's dying. And he realizes he's not going to be able to fulfill his oath, which is horrifying to him. And Grombrindal shows up. And Grombrindal, chases off the last few goblins and is like, yeah, you're dying. I'm sorry to say. And the dwarf goes, will you take this? Will you carry my oath? Will you please take this item, take my oath for me, and carry it to where it needs to go? And Grombrindal says, aye, lad, I'll do that for you. And he takes it, that dwarf dies, and Grombrindal does that. He takes the item and he wanders off and delivers it. Because that is, to me, the most notable thing. That's why he's often referred to as a spirit of vengeance, is that he usually shows up just as somebody dies, and he's like, I'm going to get that son of a bitch that killed you. Or it's, there's this important thing that if I die and this particular thing goes unfulfilled, my family will be in shame. I will die in shame. And Grombrindal goes, I won't let that happen to you.
And I'll take that further and say that it actually undermines him as a spirit of vengeance, because he isn't really. What he is a spirit of oath keeping.
Yeah.
What he does is he is literally a manifestation of what happens when an oath is broken. And he does not want oaths to be broken. Oaths are fundamental to what he is effectively a god of, if you want to perceive it as such a thing. He is a spirit that will manifest. He is somebody that will arrive and ensure oaths are seen through and ensure that oaths, when they are made, do not get broken. And you could argue even his appearance at the Great War between the elves and the dwarfs was purely because the High King eventually makes an oath, which is quite clear. He won't die until this war is finished. And Grombrindal himself helps ensure that that oath is eventually comes to pass. And of course, when that war comes to an end, eventually having yoinked the good old Phoenix crown away, the High King dies because his oath is now complete. Because he's just too fucking stubborn to die because he's sworn that particular oath. And Grombrindal appears to be, rather than a spirit of vengeance per se, a spirit of ensuring the oaths are seen through. And sometimes that will be incredibly small. I'll add one other detail as well that I think is important because it begins to pop up here. And that's that Grombrindal is also, in terms of dwarfs, characterized as exceedingly wise. So he is somebody whose advice not only should be listened to, should be heeded absolutely. And this obviously, in terms of the stories that are presented, is generally something like this. Hi, I'm a random dwarf who has arrived. Go away, random dwarf, but I am old. Look at my white beard. Stroke, stroke, stroke. oh, yes, well, I suppose, whatever. I think you should do this. Fuck off, I'm a king. And then later, ha-ha! Oh, you were Grombrindal all along. I should have paid attention to you. Oh, damn. But that wisdom aside, in turn, is often reflected as actually being a seer. And I think that there is definitely an aspect of the character who knows what's coming, because he often appears with a small group of dwarfs that perhaps have not sworn any oaths. They're just in a difficult place. They've got no chance. Grombrindal arrives from nowhere, murderalizes anything that threatens them, and then moves on, often without even talking to them. Nothing more than, you Grombrindal! Aye, lads! And then off he's gone. But those dwarves may be important to a conflict later. So whether it's just wisdom or whether he's an actual seer or not is to be, well, determined.
Yeah, so to throw an entire monkey wrench into that and just go way into the deep end, because I feel like it, before we get cut, I'm going to do a deep end, absolute batshit crazy thing, and then we'll get caught up on super chats. So one of the things that's interesting to think about is, like Andy said, Grombrindal is literally a prophet. Like, he shows up and will say, hey, you should do this thing, or you should be worried about this thing. And you good?
Pardon me, I've got something I need to check, so I'll be just 2 seconds while I do this. Apparently, my parcel just arrived. So, apologies, will I vanish again? Let's leave Sotek to deal with it all by himself. Twice in a row. What a day. I'm like Grombrindal. I only arrive when I'm needed.
Well, so I'll wait for my crackpot theory for when he gets back, because I do want to get his take on it. But hopefully you're all doing well and you're having like a nice Easter and everything today. We hope you're enjoying the episode. So the thing about Grombrindal is, for the remainder of the episode, we're going to be talking more about concepts and themes, not really like a timeline before we get to some end time stuff, because Grombrindal does not really have a timeline. All of his lore is kind of scattered around. It could happen at any point. Because he's not really your typical character. He's a very static character that's not trying to accomplish any particular goal. He's more just appearing and doing things and then vanishing again, which leans very much into like his Age of Sigmar categorization, where actually, no, that's not true, because in Age of Sigmar, he actually is trying to accomplish something. But that's something we'll talk a little bit about. So tell you what, I'll just answer random questions from the chat. I'm not going to do super chats because those are paid comments that I think me and Andy should both look at. But if you have any random questions that you'd like to submit until Andy gets back, I can feel free to try and grab those out. Yeah, we hope you're all having a wonderful day. How to use Grombrindal in RPG. So the best way to use him is just kind of how we're talking about. That Grombrindal is best to have, like, you do a little side quest or adventure type thing where Grombrindal shows up as kind of a mysterious wanderer. Like, he should kind of look just like some old haggard dwarf in like kind of a tattered traveler's cloak, who gives some like sage words of wisdom and kind of like grumbles at the party or players about like something they really, really want to do. And he gives them kind of some sage advice of like, you shouldn't do this thing. after like getting them to share a beer with him or whatever, and being like, back in my day, like people had proper respect for their ancestors and yada yada. And once they kind of have that conversation with them, and it should be, you should give them advice that is like objectively from a far distance the right thing to do, but something they maybe don't want to do. And then they go on to do their thing, and he'll probably end up saving them, and they'll realize, holy shit, this guy's amazing, and then he'll vanish. And if they listen to his advice, maybe they get a good outcome. And if they didn't listen to his advice, he saves them from the folly of their actions, but they still get an overall bad outcome. Would probably be a fun way to use them.
Apologies for disappearing there. I was getting new lights delivered, apparently, for our studio, my living room. And apparently they wanted a password, which was very rude. I got interrupted, and I'm the only one with it. So sadly, I had to scroll through emails trying to find the passcode just so that they could deliver a thing that I'd already paid for.
Can't let you have the lights without the password.
Idiots.
So in any event, my crackpot thing is this, which I don't think is that big of a crackpot theory, but I'm going to say it anyway. So the thing that's really cool about Grombrindal that Andy mentioned that we talked about is that Grombrindal is aware of things that are going to happen. He also has flat out canonical knowledge of things that he shouldn't know about. Like he's very worldly wise, and he knows basically everything. Like if he encounters you, he knows who you are. He knows who your ancestors are. Like often to get someone to at least listen to his initial pitch, he'll bring up their dad or their granddad or their great, wait for the break, their great granddads. And they'll be like, how dare you mention my ancestor? And he's like, well, you would listen to them, wouldn't you? They would listen to me because they remember to listen to their elders. And they'd be like, but they listened to him at that point. He knows everything. You can just hand wave it away of like, oh, well, it's just part of the narrative or it's because he's Grombrindal. But I think it's fun to explore why he can actually do that in universe. And I think the important thing to say is that this is Snorri Whitebeard. This is a character who has died, who has gone beyond the mortal realms to somewhere else, somewhere probably more etheric in nature, and then came back, which means he went into a place where time does not exist as a concept. And future, past, present doesn't have any meaning. And he was likely able to see everything. Everything that was, everything that will be, everything that might be and can be. It doesn't mean he knows exactly what's going to happen, because once again, he does arrive late. And but it means that he knows everything that might be able to happen. And he is trying to influence matters in a positive direction.
So I would take that and accept it. And by that I mean, if we're dealing with an entity, because let's use the word entity rather than spirit, just so we don't have, hags arriving going, I control you! Ah! No, stop. Oh, an entity that passes over into the realm of the gods, the realm of chaos, the aether. There's lots of different names for this warp that lies beyond. But what we do know for certain is whether this glittering realm that he moves off to is the aether or not, it probably is. And if that's the case, there is no time there. Time doesn't exist. That's not necessarily true. Time doesn't exist in the same way that it exists elsewhere. So we have ourselves a clear reason for why an entity which is flitting in and out of the aether could be both material and fixed in the material realm, and also immaterial, aware of literally everything that's going to go from the beginning right to the destruction of the Warhammer world, and seeing that it's coming. And seeing that it's coming in a particular way, you could almost see him as a prophet of the end times and a prophet of what could go wrong if he doesn't arrive in place. But whenever he arrives, he's now bound by the physical that he has around him. He has to literally hike his way over to wherever he's needed. And by the time he gets there, bound within a mortal mind, bound with a mortal mind's processes, he doesn't know he's arrived late or not. He arrives and he's like, I would have done better if I could have got here. Or I would have done better if I'd seen this particular thing. Because just because you can be in a place with no time doesn't mean that you know everything. Because all of existence is a little bit hard to squeeze into one brain. He's someone who is aware of the bigger picture, aware of the individuals he's coming out to set, the particular oaths that he is there to ensure are maintained. Often he arrives too late and has to do the oath himself, rather than allow the people who should be seeing through those oaths. He is effectively a figure who's constantly on chasing after the stories that he is aware are coming to pass. So yeah, I think that works really well. I don't think it is particularly too out there in terms of a reality. It also speaks to how he could be all the other versions of White Dwarf that pop up in other realms, because he is effectively an extra character. He lives in the Aether. The Aether is an extra dimensional place. It includes routes through to all of Games Workshop's worlds. We know this already. And we can try and pretend that Warhammer is not part of all the rest of it if we wish, but we know that's not what really is the case. They're all loosely interconnected in a weird way, and they are connected through the warp. They are connected through the Aether, the realm of the gods, the realm of chaos, the divine realms, and this is where he lives. So there is absolutely no reason that he, like say even Be'lakor, or maybe any of the other greater demons et al. That have managed to pop up in 40k or elsewhere, are not all somewhat similarly the same entity, just appearing in different ways. That is, however, far beyond the Warhammer story, but I think we can draw from that part of it and say, is he an entity that is aware of the future? The answer is yes, but it is imperfect, because just because you can see into a potential future because you come from somewhere else, in no way means that you have looked at this one. Because you've got to look.
Yeah.
And that might not give you enough.
Especially when there's a future coming you're trying to avert, and it relies on making a dwarf change his mind, which Grombrindal understands is a bitch. Getting caught up on super chats real quick before we continue. Madonna Scallum, Dragonback is also one of the best in culture view of Slayers, a walking corpse that I don't know what that is, but it's in my loved one's skin. Why? Yeah. Now, Doom and Dragonback is a fantastic book.
Yeah, good book.
Let's see here. Phil 5991. Oi, that's enough talk about that stupid stunty and that Ponzi elf. You get your talk about the real star is Skik it, the Black Gobbo. No, we refuse.
Black Gobbo.
We'll talk about him a little later, because I know there's a comment from the questions that we'll focus on him. Jonathan Scott, under Snorri or his immediate successors, why didn't the Dawi deal with the Dawi Tsar? They were at the height of their power for 1,000 years. We have to keep in mind the dwarfs did not know about them for a long time.
Yeah, Warhammer World's a big place. It's a big place.
Yeah, it's a huge place. And like there's no reason to go to that part of the Darklands, especially. The dwarves had already gone to Zornu's School, and those among them that turned back said, nope, this place is corrupted. We should not stay here. Turn around. Once that decision is made, the dwarves go, oh, our ancestors say don't go to this place. So we don't. Like the end. And then as far as like where the capital is, Zarnagrund, there's no reason to go there as far as the dwarves are concerned. It's not even a mountain. It's like the opposite of a mountain. It's a big pit. They would not go there. And then by the time they're aware of them, the dwarves, you have to remember, the dwarves are not stupid. And they also tend to be more defensive. The Chaos Dwarves are an abomination, true, but they know that in order to wipe them out, they would have to take everybody and go fight a war that, even if they won, would cripple them to such an extent that the Karazankor would fall.
Yeah, so I'm going to also add another potential here, because you've got to remember the Warhammer world is a world of continually expanding tales and a world full of massive holes in its background. And I think that it's almost impossible that there wasn't a mighty attack at some point. It would have come. Because once they found out the horrors of what was lying out there, they would have made an attempt. And we know what the response of that was, because we know what happens next. They fail. The Chaos Dwarves stand. And I think that almost certainly at some point this attack came, and it was horrific. The casualties would have been awful. The step towards the dwarf eventual collapse could potentially even be dropped in at one of these great failures, as a massive host, a massive throng of dwarfs is brought low. So I think that there is probably a story that's untold, rather than saying why didn't they do it. But I think also there is a lot of reasons for why the attack, assuming that one came late, because of the very real situation that has been described there by Sotek. And loosely speaking, yeah, they're at their height of their power, but they're not infallible. And the Chaos Dwarves are freaking nasty. And I do recommend go check our stream on Zarnagarund for a lot of the details for the just how high those Chaos Dwarves get in terms of their capabilities, but also the many troubles that they face.
Morning to Crescent, thanks so much for the bits. Malekith sort of found that the classic issue was someone stuck between conflicting oaths. There was no right choice he could have made. Yeah, though the what's interesting is that from a dwarf perspective, there is. But a dwarf perspective is the oaths you made to me, you should have followed to the letter. And if that means you die, then, well, you die. But at least you die honorable.
Yeah, there's a really lovely bit as well where the White Dwarf himself justifies humans being shit. And he says they're shit because humans don't have the necessary, let's say, impetus to be oath keepers, because ultimately they don't have an afterlife that they can be certain of. And that lack of afterlife means that they have to constantly protect their life under any circumstances. Humans should always be considered as oath breakers. And if you want to go behind that, elves are not so different. And in some respects, you get that idea that maybe Grombrindal himself has realized that he made a mistake. Because ultimately, elves, if they die, if they actually die, they are so fucked. They are beyond fucked. Now, that's a different stream. But they have a horror show ahead of them. Elves have it bad.
Yeah, and I don't think instead of it, oh, we don't know what's afterlife. It's, oh, we know what the afterlife is, and it's hell.
It's literal hell, unless they are lucky enough to be, and I say lucky enough to become an eternal screaming ghost, or worse, somehow strap themselves out with the aether, where they're doomed to go to, and somehow keep their soul in the material realm. They're fucked. So, in many respects, you can almost hear Grombrindal's regret as he discusses humans, when he's actually saying, I made the mistake. I have returned because I asked for an impossible oath. And I think that is also super fascinating, because that oath has to be kept as far as the dwarfs are concerned. But he has, by the time that this story comes round and he's looking at the humans, realized that humans will never be oath keepers. They can't be. And in turn, that is echoing the idea that elves, because everyone knows elves are worse, also can't be. He done fucked up.
Yep. Mandata's column, just realized Snorri's reaction to the Witch King is parallel to the Dawin Drathzar. Then you should have died. And I do love not Anakin. The fuck. I honestly, like, Malekith has a fucking awesome storyline. As long as you don't fall, it's so easy to be like, oh, well, he's the king of the Dark Elves. I really like the Cackling Evil version, but it's such a better story if you don't do that to him.
I agree.
Even though it's tempting, and I get the temptation. If you want a Cackling Evil character, just do like fucking like Malice Darkblade is so much more fun as a Cackling Evil asshole, who's just up against even worse evil assholes. But Malekith is not the character you want to do that with. Still loading. How similar are Le Green Knight, Grombrindal, and Nakai? They're all extremely different, but there are similarities. Don't get me wrong. The Green Knight and Grombrindal are similar in that they are the first great kings of their people who have basically come back to help protect them and try and guide them along better paths. So in that sense, they're similar, but they're different in that the Green Knight is a true etheric entity. There is virtually nothing physical about him, to the point that he's even ethereal, and he can literally teleport from place to place and yada, yada, yada. He's more of the Green Knight's more of like a greater demon of the Lady of the Lake than anything else. Whereas Grombrindal when he appears in the world, he is physical, which makes him more like Nakai, where Nakai is also a physical being who is trying to be at the right place at the right time and can't always be there because he's constricted by the laws of reality. So in that sense, Grombrindal and Nakai are also very similar. But where Grombrindal is very, very different is that Grombrindal is genuinely a greater than mortal entity who has passed beyond and came back, whereas Nakai has never died. Nakai is just kind of a weird first generation Kroxigor who's probably got some powerful artifacts and maybe he's able to travel using some unusual hijinks, but is overall a purely physical figure. Where, Nakai has gotten sick and nearly died after fighting the Beast of Clan Pestilence and had to be healed before he could get up and walk away. You would never see that with the Green Knight or Grombrindal. They would just vanish after a battle. Mendatis, I love dwarf Gandalf, a wandering shrouded elder showing up to save via honor or advisor action, revealed in glory in disaster, often ignored.
Yep.
And we're gonna talk about that specific version of him in just a moment.
Yep.
Sneak Prick, y'all are great. Oh, thanks.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I wish more people in the world could be given $5 and just told, "You're awesome."
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
It makes your day so much better.
It does. Thanks.
Mandatus, thank you. God damn, Mandatus, you're just ridiculous, dude. Unrelentingly opening up the coffers of Kazakarok these days. Related to yesterday's questions, from Andy's stream. What is Grombrindal's relation and interaction with Gazul? Not only is Gazul ancestor god of the dead, but Gazul discovered the runes of each ancestor god, and Grombrindal seems to be the one returned beyond death. So there's a story here that could be fascinatingly explored, a short story of Grombrindal, the first time especially, or maybe every time, Grombrindal likely has to talk to his uncle, Gazul. Because Gazul is the brother to Grimnir, Valea, and all them. But Gazul, from most versions that I think I'm aware of, does not have any descendants. He basically just went into his role and stayed in his role as a guardian of that gateway. What could be very, very fun, not necessarily canon, but very fun, is that Gazul, especially being the one who discovered the runes of the ancestors themselves, which means he would know Grombrindal's rune, understands the true natures of the dwarfs better than anyone. And every time Grombrindal wants to leave to go do something, he has to talk to Gazul and convince Gazul to open the door for him, which I love the idea of Gazul counter-arguing and trying to convince him, no, this is why you should stay. And that being a conflict that Grombrindal has to deal with every single time. Now, that's just me headcanoning, but I really like that because it would actually give Gazul some agency and make him a relevant character, which he just kind of isn't a lot of the time.
Yeah, and I broadly agree with this. Gazul and their lack of mentions of Gazul was something that bugged me. It's why in the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay starter set, I did Lord Gazul's Under-Earth, and I just brought it up at this side there just to make sure I didn't forget what I wrote, which was an important part of Karak Zanda's history in particular. And I feel it's a god, particularly for an ancestor god, more accurately. For the dwarves, it's often forgotten. Now, if you're looking for an understanding of what the nature of the relationship here is, I would again mirror what was said here. And we've got ourselves an ancestor god who does not clearly have any descendants. And I would suggest to you that if you're looking to expand upon this, there's a clear reason why. He dies early, really, really early, and passes through into the glittering what lies beyond the great ancestor halls. He is the first there, and he maintains it. There is a reason that he is the lord of the underworld, so to speak, and that's because he is Gazul, the first one who popped over there. It makes some sort of loose sense, at least. So if we've got somebody who stands on that side, the other ancestor god standing loosely on the other side, and you're going to have to effectively bargain with Gazul to pass through what is the equivalent of Mor's portal. You've got yourself a really nice starting point for a fun relationship that lies between Grombrindal, his nephew, and Gazul himself. Gazul, who I imagine has some very strict rules, laws in place as he sits there with his giant rune sword, ensuring that the laws of death themselves are not broken. The oaths that lie around it are not transgressed. And Grombrindal having to effectively say, come on, we have to do something. There's a really potential cool relationship that could be had there. And unlike most other god figures, I really like it when the dwarf gods in particular have actual character. And by that I mean they are quite material. They are not weird etheric entities. They are just not, because they're dwarfs, and dwarfs are material. You have to literally persuade them. And we all know just how stubborn dwarfs can be. The ancestor gods are no different in their individual realms. So that means that we can have ourselves proper conversations with really quite ridiculous tier creatures that are fun in a way that if, for example, you were to say, hey, let's get Tal, the god of the wild from the Empire, and have him have a conversation, you're just left going, yeah, really? Would Tal really have a conversation? He's a freaking god from the Aether where things don't make sense like that. By comparison, the dwarfs do, which means that pulling down on these relationships in particular is well worth, I think, spending some world building time on, because these characters are fascinating. It's really nice to manifest them in one way or another. And Gazul, I agree, should definitely have more detail.
Yep. Which just a hilarious fun fact about Gazul. He has significantly more lore in Age of Sigmar and Total War Warhammer than he does in 6th, 7th, or 8th edition Warhammer Fantasy.
Crazy.
Jonathan Scott, how would Grombrindal engage with the Cathayans? I don't think he would ever at all for any reason, because there'd be no reason for him to be there.
The only way it would ever happen is if the Cathayans moved on force against the dwarfs. And if they did that, which, let's be honest, it's Warhammer, they'll probably do it every other week once they actually get an armory in place. And the second that happens, Grombrindal will be all over the place, engaging, literally engaging with Cathayans.
Yeah, I will take your super chat and flip it a little bit, because I think you're wanting an answer, so let me try and give you one of what would the Cathayans think about Grombrindal, because we know there are dwarf quarters within several of the Cathayan cities, and they would have legends about Grombrindal and tell them to the Cathayans, which I think the Cathayans would find extremely fascinating, because to the Cathayans, the idea of your ancestors coming back to help fight alongside you is not that weird of an idea. That's a concept that exists within Cathay. The spirit dragon is quite literally able to send ancestors forth to fight. And the Cathayans would go, oh, we have that too. And that would lead to a kind of probably a very hilarious conversation between the dwarfs and the Cathayans, and probably actually suggest that the two of their cultures would get along shockingly well. Potentially.
Yeah, there could potentially be a lot in there. Yeah.
Yeah. Alternatively, you could also have the hilarious idea of them being like, we have a dragon that does that. Dwarfs being like, you what? Dragon. Ledor, in terms of accent for dwarfs, I've often seen non-native English speakers give them a German accent. At the same time, here in Germany, I've often seen a Nordic accent. The elves are always
Nordic's
French.
common. Yeah, Nordic's super common. Super common for a variety of dwarf. But elves being French, that to me is mental.
That's hilarious. I love that. That's so funny.
Yeah, I love that.
What do you do with the Bretonnians then? Commander Bone, Gazul, I have no kids. Scavor, dad hates me. Oh yeah, Scavor is his son, isn't he? But
I was talking more about descendants in general. We don't generally have people claiming, you know what, Gazul is my ultimate ancestor. Yeah, it's not a thing.
Yeah, I also, if you go with our Zarnagrin video where we talked about who we think Hashit might actually be, you could have the reinforced thing of why Gazul does not want ancestor gods returning to the mortal plane if you run with the theory we talked about in that video, which you should go watch.
Straight, you should go watch that one, because I still like that as a head canon.
that is one of my favorite things we've ever come up with. It makes Scavor so much more interesting if that's what happened to him.
Yep,
Hammond,
agreed.
What did Thorik say to Balcrack Grimgorson? Gazul type.
Seriously.
Gazul type. Yes.
Oh, Hammond.
Obviously. Oh my God. Hammond. I
love that.
In Hammond's version, that must be what dwarves say to each other at funerals. Gazul tight. Gazul tight.
Gazul tight.
Is the Glittering Realm Warhammer's version to the Norse Glassisvaler, the Glittering Plains? That's not a horrible comparison.
Yeah.
By any means. How does Grombrindal react to Dwarden AOS? There is a lot about that in this book. Grombrindal, Saga, Chronicles of the Wanderer. So go.
It's invisible. What's wrong with your book?
It's a special book. It's a special book. It's invisible. It's really, really good. Grombrindal. Andy would probably actually love AOS Grombrindal, because basically his job, what he's doing, is he's wandering around reminding the Dwarden of what they should be, as opposed to what they are, and trying to remind them about why it's important to go back to their roots and to be proper dwarfs. Hilariously, he's kind of being used to sort of chastise the first edition of AOS, where the Dwarden were not great, especially the Fire Slayers and the Caradron Overlords, both of whom were very mercenary factions. Grombrindal has basically gone to them and said, this is fucking stupid. Y'all need to act like actual dwarfs. And they're going, oh, okay. He's causing rather dramatic changes among the Dwarden factions, which is great. So, oh, wait, I missed a Twitch bits. Let me grab that. Where is it? There it is. Morning to Crescent. Response to humans dying. Would that tie in with the Dawi support of Sigmar to give humanity the chance for an afterlife with the chance to be Oath Keepers? Probably not. Dwarfs, I don't think dwarfs would really view it that way, and they would probably understand after talking to humans very briefly that Sigmar's not a death god. No. Mor is the death god.
Yeah, absolutely. Further, the dwarf afterlife is not open to humans. It doesn't actually matter if they're oath keepers. They're never going to have a dwarf afterlife. That's for dwarfs. In the same way that the human afterlife is not open to dwarfs, because it's the human afterlife. They have completely different souls. They manifest in very different ways. They have completely different gods doing completely different things. So I think the only strong relation between the two of them there would be Grombrindal's, I think, oft repeated claim that the only human that was an actual proper oath keeper was Sigmar, which suggests personal connection. So
yeah, it's also worth mentioning dwarves don't tend to view Sigmar as a god. They're just like, yes, he's a great ancestor. You should seek to emulate him. So it's good that you like emulate him and respect him. But like the idea that he's like a god, the dwarves are kind of like, okay, all right.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It depends on the dwarf. I think I would muddy that water a little, because some of them most certainly do, because it's popped up in a couple of lore points where, the dwarfs are always like, that's your god. I think you're doing it wrong, perhaps. He's your ancestor, but he's certainly not an ancestor god. But yeah, broadly speaking, Grombrindal is marked quite cleanly as seeing as Sigmar as an honorable oath keeper who stands in stark contrast with all other examples of his species, and in exactly the same way stands also in stark contrast with Malekith.
Okay, so I'm going to do something a little unusual this week, which is I'm going to dive into the Discord questions now a little early. Because the thing about Grombrindal is that I think a lot of the questions will allow us to talk about the rest of them, because he's not really a character you can talk about in a linear fashion, because that's not really how he works. He's more of a short story specialist, is the way I tend to kind of refer to him. And that he just kind of pops up and appears in short stories. But real quick, Dark Deeds for the third time.
So I'm going to do my third Dark Deeds bit for all of you out there. Now, if you weren't here at the beginning of the stream, you will have completely missed that the pre-orders for the new game from Warhammer Legends, Mark Gibbons and Andy Chambers, Dark Deeds, is now open, and you can go and pre-order this game. Now, obviously, I'm very excited about this because I was a developer on that game. And me, alongside folks such as Andy Leask and Lindsay Law from the Warhammer channels, are also responsible for bringing this game to life. It has just gone up online, and we're super excited. I'm only going to drop a few extra little details just in case you're interested. What the heck is it anyway? It's a game of malicious minions where you get little cards and you play a minion who's working on behalf of a terrible patron who's attempting to take over the city. And there's a variety of nemesis of this patron that you've got to try and take out. There's a variety of city guards who are all corrupt, attempting to stop you. And it's a lovely mixture of all the dark, humorous games that we all know and love on our Warhammer and Terry Pratchett sides, all rolled into one. Super fun for 2 to 5 players. And I recommend it. And as Sotek mentioned earlier in the stream, we had a lovely stream just last night over on Rookery Publications where we talked through how Dark Deeds could not just be a lovely little board game, which it is. It could also be used to inspire your RPGs or used in your RPGs in a variety of ways, because as most of you will know, I do love my role-playing games. So I'm going to go and stop talking about this now and just simply say, please go order Dark Deeds. It makes an enormous difference to us. We can't continue to make independent games like this without obviously selling bajillions of them. So please do buy bajillions of them. But while you're doing that, I'll go find a link, not to the game itself, although I will post that one too, but also to the stream that we had yesterday. So if you want to go watch us having a chat, you can do so. So first, there's the chat's links for going and pre-ordering if you wish. The first one being the UK link, the second one being the US link. And I will also go grab the stream link as we move back over to the absolutely beautiful Sotek.
Wow, thank you.
It's the beard. It's the beard.
And you may be like, well, what does this have to do with Lorebeards? Just keep in mind, anything you're doing to support what's going on at Rookery or Lawhammer is also tangentially supporting what we do here at Lorebeards, because it supports Andy. So please do support their game so that there can be more fun things in the future. Because you'd be surprised how much one's personal success can tangentially.
Sure, you keep doing other stuff.
Involve other things. It's weird how the world works.
On the very simplest of things, the reason I can do things like this is because I've got my other business on, and if that works, then I keep doing this. If that doesn't, I have to go freelancing again. And freelancing, as much as I've done it for most of my life, sucks by comparison. I'd much rather create our own games and have fun.
Yeah, especially like just think if there's ever something involving Lorebeards that we do in the future, then you could have from the successful creator of Dark Deeds, this Lorebeards thing.
Ooh.
Inquisitor. Okay, so let's get into actual questions here.
Let's get into it.
How much of Grombrindal's lore is from the old pre-Warhammer or D&D distributor days? I don't think any. He didn't really come around as a character until much. We talked about that a lot in the earlier.
White Dwarf as a concept, as in you've got a miniature that you could use in your games. It goes all the way back, really far back to D&D, and White Dwarf, I think it was 50. The first time it pops up, and then it pops up again at 100, and then obviously, eventually, it gets properly incorporated into Warhammer. When it gets incorporated into Warhammer, its lore is exclusively Warhammer lore, and that's at White Dwarf, I think 100, pardon me, 200, at White Dwarf 200 back in 1996. So, loosely speaking, the lore that we all know and love today is absolutely modern Warhammer, and by modern, I mean 4th edition Warhammer Fantasy Battle, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, probably about 2 onwards. Everything that came before that wasn't really incorporated into the lore at all.
Yeah, like the name and the model existed before then.
Totally.
Behemoth's boy, tangentially related. Is the Black Gobbo an actual character Warhammer Fantasy, or are they purely a marketing creation to pit against the White Dwarf? Technically, it's more the second one. He's more of a marketing counter or something they would blame like problems in shipping or the website going down on. But he does actually exist in the setting. But he funny enough, has nothing to do with Grombrindal. The Black Gobbo is an actual character. He appears mostly in the Grom the Paunch saga, which you can go watch our Grom the Paunch stream, though I don't think we talked that much about the Black Gobbo. But he's kind of an annoying antagonist, along with one other character whose name I'm really struggling to remember. But if you play the Total War Warhammer quest battle for Grom the Paunch, the Black Gobbo is brought up in his little speech that he's giving because he hates the Black Gobbo so much for like talking shit about him. And it's kind of funny. He just sort of is a there and you'll miss it kind of little night goblin character. But he is just like Grombrindal in that he shows up in a lot of different minis and a lot of different forms. Like he's shown up in Blood Bowl, so is Grombrindal. He's shown up in AOS, so is Grombrindal. He's shown up in Warhammer, so is Grombrindal. I'm pretty sure he's even in 40k technically. So he's more of a marketing entity than anything else.
Yeah, totally. He's given much less stress than, say, for example, Grombrindal was in terms of the background lore that was filled in.
Yeah, funny enough, as far as the rivalry between the White Dwarf and the Black Gobbo, the only setting I think that actually explores that is Blood Bowl, funny enough. In the new Blood Bowl, they're both coaches and they're also both specialist players who hate each other.
Because that's awesome.
Yeah, because Blood Bowl.
Because it's awesome.
Let's see. What is the relationship between Grombrindal and his siblings who are also ancestor gods? We have no idea.
Yeah.
We have no idea what the relationship there is, which is a shame. It'd be really nice to know what he thinks of his siblings. Presumably he thinks well of them, but it'd be fun to maybe know some of like because he's a dwarf. He would have nitpicks with his brothers and sisters. Well, actually, I don't remember there being another lady ancestor god except for Valea, so it might just be brothers.
Which is a nonsense, but also represents
no
the species
sense
as a whole. It's just daft. But broadly speaking,
the only thing I was going to say is like I could almost see the argument of like there was more of a specialist designation that the daughters have, where they were like, no, we don't have time to be this ridiculous ancestor god nonsense. We have other things to do. But it's because those ladies would be incredibly important. Insanely important to what the dwarfs are. But anyway,
I agree completely.
So no is the answer. But to your second question, what about the gifts that he uses? Yes. So Grombrindal has various versions have had different items, but the coalesce version of him has 4 major items. So the one that is special, but notably less special than the others, is the Rune Helm of Zufbar. Which is a helmet that he usually doesn't wear, funny enough. Some of his model versions do, but most of the time it's actually
really amusing just how they forget that bit.
Yeah, most of the time he has it like on a string hanging from his backpack. Like the Total War Warhammer version, he doesn't wear it. He has it hanging from one of his little back pieces, which is hilarious because it implies that he still gets the buffs from it, even though he's not wearing it, which is funny. But the it's exactly what it sounds like on the tin. It was an incredibly powerful, legendary artifact forged by the Rune Lords of Zufbar, which was lost during one of, because Zufbar as a hold has actually had a couple of really gnarly sieges by Greenskins where the hold nearly fell. There was actually a good while where about half the hold was taken by Greenskins, and it took a while for Zufbar to finally get to the point where they could push them all out. And this Runehound was lost during that time, and it was believed lost forever. And Grombrindal then started appearing places wearing it or having it with him, and it bestowing its effects upon him. And it's unclear exactly why. Presumably, what I would suggest, which is kind of interesting, is that the item may have been lost to such an extent that it was either destroyed or genuinely lost in a way that could never be recovered, which is why Grombrindal has it, in that seeing that it can be recovered by a dwarf inspires much in the dwarfs, in addition to the benefits that it gives him. But that might explain why he hasn't just simply returned it to the dwarfs, is that it, and we'll talk about this with his axe in a second, it might not necessarily be real.
I agree with that, actually. Largely because it reinforces the axe situation, because there is a situation there that is worth mentioning. And it also massively inspires any dwarfs that see it, for perhaps the runic reasons, or perhaps the very fact that it still exists reasons. And the loosest of sense, your rally tests are automatically going to be passing as your dwarves go, yeah, I'm not going anywhere. And contrary to what the lore really try to suggest, dwarfs run a lot. So having such an artifact really does make an enormous difference, particularly if you are playing a game of Warhammer, because it makes Grombrindal a core that's almost impossible to break, which is super fun.
Yeah, so that's the least interesting item, despite the fact that it actually is a genuinely fascinating item.
Yeah, it is.
But so the other
armor?
one, yeah, we'll do the armor next. So
armor of Glimril.
The Glimril armor
Glimril.
is a fascinating piece. So basically, Grombrindal wears this scale mail looking armor that is beyond legendary. Its most notable achievement was that the dwarves have discovered a single scale, which was after the Battle of Thrag. Yeah, after the Battle of Thrag, Grombrindal personally killed 10,000 warriors of chaos.
All
right.
Sure. I mean, I read his stats, and seriously, but yeah, 10,000 Warriors of Chaos. It's worth noting, just to make sure that we get this very clearly in your minds. Warrior of Chaos and Warhammer are fucking mental. Really, really, really hard. A basic Chaos Warrior is a basic troop type, kicks ass and chews gum with pretty much everyone. The idea of taking out 10,000 of them with a single character is actually farcical. Ridiculous, but it's a classic piece of Nigel Stillman writing. In that Nigel Stillman wrote this, and if you don't know Nigel Stillman, he's a writer who has made some of the worst Warhammer jokes you've ever seen. Just look at the old Lizardman. But the hyperbole here, I think, really does speak to the mythic character of the White Dwarf, and speaks to perhaps a truth that is quite different to actually what occurred, because he is mythic. He has done mythical deeds. He has held off against 10,000 warriors, whilst on the other side, he has held just 2 dwarves against maybe 12 goblins that have attacked that almost certainly would have killed the 2, and he's just scraped his life through with those 12. He has done both the biggest, most ridiculous, and the smallest, what appears to be most mundane of feats, but always somehow scrapes his way through. And I think the story is obviously ridiculous, but the nature of the fact that the armor, which is the important part, the armor which the dwarves have managed to study, is created from a metal which literally doesn't exist. It's the first time they've ever encountered it, and it's the only time they have ever encountered it.
Fascinating to consider, considering like how meticulous the dwarves are when it comes to metallurgy. That this mail, which was forged for him, and hint, hint, wink, wink, by his father, most likely, good old Grugni. So this scale mail is said to be borderline impenetrable. And the only reason they found it is because at this great battle, which he was at to save a group of dwarfs who were apparently so unlucky that they got surrounded by a chaos horde of 10,000 chaos warriors.
10,000.
hopefully through they're known as they're described as foolhardy, so presumably Ungi No Chance, which is the name of the dwarf lord, presumably got a stern talking to. But the way it was found is that the chaos lord of the host, his corpse was found with a single scale in his teeth, in that he was fighting Grombrindal, and I guess in a desperate final fuck you tried to bite him and managed to pull a single scale out, and was just found with it dead, which is awesome. Like
it's pretty freaking awesome. It's also worth saying that in terms of the rules, it's basically Terminator armor, which is what the Terminator armor was back in those days. So if you really want to do your old 40k Warhammer link, you could claim that it's made of the same stuff as good old Space Marine armor, which obviously no one wants to do, but people keep on doing. So if you wanted your mysterious metal to have a name, perhaps you should look at 40k, because we do know that the weapons of the old ones have existed in a variety of different ways in Warhammer, and they are often 40k pieces of equipment. This goes right back to big campaigns like Dark Shadows, for example, all the way back to older lore and more recent lore. They constantly come up again and again, and he is quite literally the son of an ancestor god who was there during the time of the old ones. Old One tech was existent. Not only was it existent, they were receiving pretty much messages from the old ones as how to build stuff. If you want to go totally crazy, Grombrindal gives you a reason to do so, particularly because, as we know, he also pops up in other places. So he would need to have armor that could hold off against, for example, a bolter shell.
Yeah, so that's the really important thing to take away, though, is that this isn't Grumril, this isn't Star Metal, this isn't Chaos armor or anything that the dwarves have literally seen before. It is they've seen it once and that's it for eternity type armor, which likely implies that it's probably Old One tech or something similar to it, as far as what it's made out of, which is
wild.
Yeah.
Wild.
Yeah. Next, we have the Rune Cloak of Valea, which is the beautiful cloak that it seems to be able to transform based on what Grombrindal needs it to do, because often when he's initially seen, he'll have like a raggedy cloak over him that makes him just look like some old wanderer. And then when the battle gets going, he like throws it back and it turns into a beautiful cloak that is inlaid with insanely powerful runes that have been sewn in. And the runes are so immaculate and so perfect that the dwarves look and they go, only Valea could have made this.
Yeah, so I think there's also something that's worth noting here to make sure that we definitely said that before the stream comes to an end. And the number of myths that suggest that Valea and Grombrindal are lovers are significant.
Mm-hmm.
The number of times that you get a piece of lore that says something along the idea of Grombrindal, his magnificent white beard, were seen by Valea. Valea went, yeah, I'll be having myself some of that. And thus did they go boom shaka wow. Now this obviously stands contrary to the Snorri Whitebeard tale, but regardless, it comes up again and again, and even in sources where they say Snorri Whitebeard is probably the White Dwarf, they still bring up these myths again and again. Now you could argue, oh no, it's just mum loves son, but that's not the tone. That is really not the tone of how it's expressed. So be aware there is most certainly either an untold story here, which should be investigated, or an awful lot of weirdness that perhaps we don't want to investigate too closely, but they are, after all, bluntly, gods. And we all know what gods are like.
Yeah, gods are incestuous as fuck. But especially when you're dealing with dwarves or dwarves and elves, where they tend to have incestuous themes, but it's not viewed as like this is a grotesque thing that's going to result in like genetic mishaps. Mm-hmm. Dwarves and elves seem to be immune to that. That seems to be a human-only problem, generally speaking.
So they don't necessarily have the same taboos.
Yeah, it's like if you don't have the genetic downside, then your culture really wouldn't have a reason to taboo it, so it wouldn't be seen as a big deal. It would just kind of be like, whatever.
So be aware, we've got ourselves a big magical cloak of awesomeness that basically makes him immune to most magic, which is brilliant. Thanks, Valia. You rock. And the story behind that cloak is they were lovers, and that's why he got it. Now, whether that story is true or not, we will leave for you to contemplate in your own time.
And then the last one, of course,
the last one.
The one that makes you go, the what? The Rune Axe of Grimnir, which is noted that when Grombrindal pulls out his big axe, it's always an awesome moment in the story. He pulls it out, the runes will flash, and it's all epic and stuff. But it is one of Grimnir's axes, and the dwarves look at that and go, oh, that must be Grimnir's personal axe, because for those that don't know, Grimnir had 2 axes. He gave one to his son, I believe it was Morgrim, who took it back south with him and eventually would pass it on to Snorri Whitebeard, who would become the High King of the Dwarves. And then from that point forward, it's passed down to every single High King. The second one, Grimnir took with him himself, and, the dwarves believed that he had it all this time, but maybe he gave it to Grombrindal for some reason. But you may be sitting there with your eyes squinting going, wait, is it Gotrek's axe, the second axe of Grimnir that he finds in the cave in the Chaos Waste, or you go, huh? So there's 3 axes, which leads into the very often, I think, I would say the common theory that Grombrindal and his items are not the genuine physical articles. They are more like representations of certain articles.
So I'm going to contradict it heavily and give you an alternative offer. Something that it could be, which completely makes sense and allows there to be only 2 axes. Ready?
Go for it.
He lives outside of time. He literally has the axe, and another axe is elsewhere, because he has taken the axe from another point in time. He is not bound by the laws as we understand them, because he is both an ancestor god now. I mean, we can try and pretend he's not, but he is.
Yeah, he is.
He is an ancestor god. And he is outside of time because he lies within the aether and then out of the aether. And what he takes with him is literally his freaking axe, the axe that he bore when he was a king. Now, has that axe passed on to others? Yes, it has. So how could that work? It could work in a variety of ways. All you need to do to make sense of it is, even if that item is destroyed, it had existed at some point, and he just needs to get his hands on it, and it needs to go back, or alternatively, he got it later. The reason he has it is because he has it in Age of Sigmar, for example. That's how he has it. It came later. He gets it from Grimnir later, long later, after Grimnir has already done whatever it is that Grimnir does, without going into all of the end times nonsense. So there's lots of ways he can get hold of this axe. And also there's lots of ways that it could be the other axe. There's different ways we can handle this. But ultimately, we don't need to say it's a ghost weapon because he's a dead ghost. We can just simply say he is a god who lives outside of time. And the artifact, as physical as it is, does not necessarily need to follow the same time route that we're used to.
Yep, that is very possible. I will say I think I still like the ghostly, like it's a representation theory, because that I like that more for the rune helm. So
it makes sense. I like it. I like it too. But it's always good to give a nice contradictory theory so that there are more than one way for you to work your way through to the answer on this one.
Yeah, and you damn know well Games Workshop's never going to give you an answer. So yeah, those are the artifacts that he has from the ancestor gods. Those are his gifts. So he basically has one from each of the big 3, and then he's got the rune helm, which he claimed for himself.
Yep.
Old man, serious question. If we're allowed to ask AOS stuff, sure. What's Grombrindal doing in AOS recently? And do I think he'll lead a United Dwarf faction? That seems very likely, at least if David Geimer gets his way. Where David Geimer has been using him a lot in various stories to basically unify the Dwarden people. Because the Dwarden have been kind of in a weird place with AOS, especially because the free cities, which were kind of like here's all the fantasy factions of order we don't know what to do with anymore. They're kind of actually coalescing into a much more human-centric faction, which means the Dwarden and the elves kind of need to go somewhere else. So there's been a lot of lore building up to the Dwarden are marching out to reclaim their lost Kaddaks at long last, and to rebuild their realms. And Grombrindal was literally there. It's a whole thing, but Grombrindal dies during the end times. Like he dies. He's super dead, completely dead. And Grugni, if you read the Saga of the Chronicles of the Wanderer, you get a series of short stories that build up to Grugni resurrecting him and literally forging him back together, because he goes out and gets all the little pieces, the little god pieces of Grombrindal that are left, and he reforges him. And it's actually surprisingly tragic while also heartwarming and heartbreaking at the same time. It's very well written, because Grugni has to explain to Grombrindal what's happened since the world ended, and it's not a great conversation. But Grombrindal gets sent out to lead the dwarf peoples and to unite them again, because Grugni knows they're not going to listen to him because he abandoned them, essentially. Not genuinely abandoned them. He did it for reasons. But anyway, it's a long story. But he sends them out and says, you need to do what you do, which is to remind them what it is to be a dwarf, and to remind them that oaths are what matter.
Oaths.
And that they need to unify. The clans need to be brought back together, and they need to set aside their petty differences and fight for, the right thing again. He goes, all right. And he goes out and starts helping all the different Dwarden. And it seems likely he might show up as an actual mini and a big character. If he does, he'll probably be like a big High King type figure, and will probably be the representation of the god of Shaman, or the god of metal.
Yeah. So I'll give you a slightly different pitch from what it looks like from the outside. Hey, look at all these new things we did with the dwarves. Yeah, sure, but they're a bit shit, aren't they? Oh, here's the white dwarf to make them better.
You remember
That's
this?
what
Remember
it
when
looks
you
like.
liked them? You remember when you liked them? Do that again.
That's what it looks like. And they told some pretty damn good, fine stories to try and basically cover up the fact that their original stories weren't necessarily the best. And of course, that is probably not what's going on behind the scenes, but it's certainly what it freaking looks like.
Listen, it's fine for there to be a sub faction of dwarves that are mercenaries, and that's a weird thing of theirs, but that's what they do. But for every single dwarf, mercenary is bullshit.
Absolute bullshit. And that's how I feel about it. And I imagine lots of others do too. But I will say this is anecdotal. This is very much how I feel about the situation.
Anyway, moving on.
And they're covering that bullshit up. Thanks, White Dwarf. You rock.
Yeah, one of these days we could do an AOS specific stream, but that not for a while. All right, real quick questions. What do I think of Grombrindal in Total War Warhammer 3? He's fucking hilarious, and he's grossly overpowered, which is what he should be. Everyone knows the 10,000 Chaos Warriors by himself. Not a problem in Total War. He's got that covered. Not a problem at all. Yeah, his mechanics are absolutely fucking bonkers, because he wields the power of the ancestor gods themselves, which is great. The fact that he starts in Nagaroth, so he's going after Malekith. Obviously, that's something he would do in the lore, which we'll talk about a little bit here at the end. But thematically, it's perfect, and it gives him a very unique story and starting position, which is great. So yeah, I think he's awesome. Does Grombrindal know anything about Hashit? He probably knows more than anybody else.
Yeah, I imagine of all folks, he knows the most. And I also think that our suggestion over in the Zarna Grunt stream should be taken on board.
Yep. Do Chaos Wars know Grombrindal? I bet they do.
Oh, yeah.
But a positive figure.
Yeah, particularly as well, given that they purposely called out the Black Dwarf as well. So, yeah, almost certainly. You can't pull out something like the Black Dwarf, that big Chaos Dwarf, without mentioning the White Dwarf.
Yeah, the Grombrindal actually stands as a very fascinating concept to the Chaos Dwarfs, or an opposition to them, because he's a actual ancestor god who has come back to help his people.
Yeah.
Which, to their idea of that the ancestor gods abandoned us, therefore we turn to this other force,
Or they didn't.
Or they didn't. Yeah, Grombrindal represents something that threatens them on an ideological level. So the Chaos Dwarfs would really not like him. Which is great. That's awesome. You want that. Does Grombrindal know the ultimate fate of Grimnir? Yes. He just does. So. Yeah, he does. Grombrindal knows what's going on with him.
Absolutely.
He knows where he was this entire time, and he knows what happens to him. Would Grombrindal ever consider kinslaying justified? Ooh, that's a good question.
Yes.
Yeah,
Oathbreakers. Oathbreakers. If they were Oathbreakers, then yes.
Yeah.
Because ultimately they're no longer kin.
Yeah. It would be a dark situation, but yeah.
Horrible. And the chance of it ever happening would be ridiculous. But if you want to pop over to our Zarna Grunt stream, I think you've got a very clear case for where kinslaying could definitely be justified.
Does Grombrindal have big regrets that nag him? Like Andy was talking about earlier, I think he's motivated by regret.
Yes, me too. I completely think he is, and I think that one of his greatest regrets will be Malekith. I think everything about that entire situation went wrong, and ultimately, the reason it went wrong, I think he could easily lay at his own feet. I
Yeah,
think I think it's quite likely he blames himself for
yeah,
what occurred.
this is a good segue real quick to talk about end times. So when me and Andy talked about Malekith stream, and especially when we did the end times, everything that was wrong with the end times part 1 stream, one of the things we talked about was, I think in the Malekith stream, was how Malekith's story should have ended, which is that it should have been Grombrindal that killed him. And I think the thing that would have been really important about that is a lot of people, when they hear us say that, I think, you know, when we talked about from the Malekith perspective, we talked about that would have been a very suitable end. But I think a lot of people think that it would have been Grombrindal coming in all like, with his really surprisingly gnarly set of teeth and gnashing his teeth and axe Malekith down and been like, yeah. But I think it would have been heartbreaking.
Mm-hmm.
Like, would he kill Malekith? Yes, absolutely. And nothing would stop him. And it would probably doom the world, which would make it even more poetic. But I think the millisecond he killed Malekith, he would genuinely like scoop him up and would weep as the world was ending.
Yep. I think there's a beauty in that story. I do also think that there are other stories that could use the same situation. But I think if you're just looking at it for its basic storytelling building blocks, you require Snorri and Malekith to have a confrontation. And it has to be a good one. And that didn't occur.
Yeah, because their story should have concluded with one another. As much as like everyone gets wrapped up with Malekith and the Phoenix King thing, there's no representative that can enforce that concept against Malekith.
Yeah, but as an alternative, you could literally have had the White Dwarf explain to him what he did wrong. And I'm not saying Malekith did wrong, Snorri did wrong by forcing Malekith's hand in a way that you can't do. Basically, he made Malekith an oathbreaker, and he never should have, because elves can't be held to the same standard as dwarves. He fucked up. And it's ultimately his job to resolve all oaths after that because of his mistake, his regret. He lives on almost by his own sheer will rather than anything else because of the horror of what he's done. He's basically, in some respects, a white slayer rather than a red-headed slayer. He's got his own oath breaking that's gone on. His job is to take Malekith and sit down and say, boy, sit in my knee. You've done fucked up. You fucked up. You should be king. Everything you've done has broken the world. And this is your fault, but I don't blame you. I blame me. I'm the one that I'm the one that screwed
too
up.
Much on you. Yeah.
And there's another way that we could resolve that story in a way that would be actually heartbreaking. Imagine Malekith being put in a place where he, because remember, he's an elf, over emotional to extremes, broke down in tears because of what he'd become. Because at no point was that his end goal. That isn't what he wanted when he was originally there. And having someone who can sit down and say, dude, son, you fucked up. And I'm here to tell you, and I will keep telling you until you accept it. That would have given us a more realistic outcome for Malekith having effectively a complete character change as he goes from heel to hero. And it would have made more sense.
I think that would have done such a good job of getting a lot of people to accept the Malekith is the Eternity King storyline. As opposed to what we got.
Bullshit line. The entire thing makes no sense, but it's not when we're sitting trying to make sense of it all. It's not our jobs to criticize. Well, we will criticize through the end, but it's not our job to necessarily say what happened is wrong. Instead, this is what's happened. We tend to try and go, our job is to try and make it make sense, to try and make you look at it and go, you know what? This rocks. This stupid situation actually kicks ass. But how can we make that kick ass? And I think that no matter what outcome we have between Snorri and Malekith, it is the route towards making it kick ass. The White Dwarf is absolutely required to make sense of Malekith. And if that doesn't happen, you've not just got a wasted opportunity, you've fucked up the story. And that's where it currently sits. But that doesn't mean that they can't retcon it. That doesn't mean that they can't come in and say, actually, back in the day, this occurred. Age of Sigmar's been doing that all over the place. And there's no reason that that couldn't happen again. But broadly speaking, Malekith and Snorri needed to have it out.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. So if you're listening, DWA, please fix that in man, when you bring back Malarian and AOS as the big god of shadow, just give us a scene of him talking to Grombrindal and give us that flashback and fix it. That'd be so good.
Yeah.
I'd be all over that.
Yeah, me too.
Please. All right. So next question. Is Grombrindal the biggest daddy's boy in the section? No, God no. I'd say Malekith is way more of a daddy's boy than Grombrindal is. Grombrindal respects his father, but he also like took, he did his own thing and like seemed to have a
very long time. He's a high king.
Yeah. He seemed to have a pretty considerable amount of distance with his parents, who granted had a lot of children and all of their children were very important. But yeah, no, I wouldn't say he's really much of a daddy's boy.
Agreed.
Do you think Grombrindal approves of Belegar and his strong desire to reclaim the Eight Peaks? I think that is a character Grombrindal should have appeared to, and I think Grombrindal would have warned him a lot, and Belegar would not have listened. And Grombrindal that Belegar is the perfect example of a character that Grombrindal would appear to and say, like honestly, in the end times, it probably should have been Grombrindal that appeared to Belegar at the end and was like, you should take your people and leave Carrick Eight Peaks and go reinforce the Karazhan. And Belegar being like, no, absolutely not. I am king. I will stay here. You cannot tell me what to do. And Grombrindal being like, I understand. I think Grombrindal would have been heartbroken, but he would get it. Like, you're right. You're king. I cannot force you to leave.
The oath of kingship.
Yeah. You fine. You will fulfill your oath. I understand that. But like,
I think there'd be a strong argument for listen to your ancestors. Your oath demands that you protect your people. And I think that he almost certainly wouldn't have, because that is the very nature of the White Dwarf, as expressed multiple times. He comes along, he provides wisdom, and the dwarfs, in their stubborn nature, refuse it. In many respects, he's the anti-stubborn. He's the dwarf who's constantly saying, look, I understand your oaths, and I will see your oaths through, but you've got to do the right thing. And I think that's why you could have a very clear, lovely end between Malekith and the White Dwarf because of that. He's learned from his mistakes.
Yeah,
there's a lot there.
Yeah, especially if you're running if the end times, like we and Andy have talked about consistently, had been dragged out more and had more time to breathe, you could have had more time to enjoy the fall of Carrick Eight Peaks with Grombrindal saving like maybe Belegar's wife and his son, along with a handful of others, and he leads them out of the city as it completely falls, and Belegar realizes that he done fucked up. And there's nothing but being Belegar, he doubles down. As he sees Grombrindal, and he's like, all right, but I'm staying. And Grombrindal being like, I know you are.
Yeah.
And like,
save my family, do what needs to be done. I'm staying. The sinking ship is mine to stand in.
Yeah, and Grombrindal would say, you're an honor, you're honorable. Yeah. You're by many definitions, you're doing the right thing. But I will get your family to Karazakarak, which that would have been a really nice way to end the dwarf story, because like it ended in tragedy, but it was so fast, so rushed.
Yeah, agreed on all fronts.
All right, anyway, IS Long Go, the Slayer episode, how they view Grombrindal. Could you perchance talk about it? Slayers. The Slayer relationship with Grombrindal would probably be a little more complex, because he's often kind of like the guy that shows up to save you at the last second, which Slayers would not appreciate. There's actually a couple of stories that have Grombrindal interacting with Gotrek. It happens more in Age of Sigmar, but it does happen in Old Fantasy. Gotrek does not like Grombrindal, because Grombrindal gets in the way of fulfilling stupid oaths, is the best way I could put it. And Slayers want to fulfill a fundamentally stupid oath. Of Grombrindal probably is the kind of guy that's like, no, you can't die here because there's something more important you need to do. And the Slayer being like, you ruined my doom. How dare you? So their relationship would probably be relatively antagonistic. Even though Grombrindal is right, but from the Slayer's perspective, he is violating a Slayer's doom, which in dwarf culture is a pretty big no-no. You're not supposed to get in the way of a Slayer. Even though it may be the right thing to do. Which, if you read Gotrek and Felix, that happens all over the fucking place. Like, that is a core theme of Gotrek and Felix. Is Felix finding hilarious, clever ways to get Gotrek to not kill himself. The Nice Admiral. Who of the other major characters have met Grombrindal, and how did their meeting go? Not a lot. He tends to show up in kind of more small-scale stories. I believe Thorgrim has met him.
I can't recall that story. Which one was that? I don't recall it.
Oh no, that was Bugman. Because one of the things that happens, one of the things that's weird, that's interesting, worth noting, Bugman is used as a Grombrindal figure by certain authors, to kind of a ridiculous extent, where they conflate the two characters. Where, like, if you read the End Times, Joseph Bugman pulls a Grombrindal, where he shows up at the last second to save Hiking Thorgrim during the Battle of Karazakarak, and like Bugman comes off as almost a deific figure, where he like gives them the ale and it heals all Thorgrim's wounds, and he gives them this very sage advice and yada yada. That's not really what Bugman's supposed to be like.
No, it's a bit weird.
Yeah, that was supposed to be Grombrindal in that moment, essentially. That was, if you go back and read that, that is literally Grombrindal. He's just apparently looks like Bugman, has Bugman's Stein, but Bugman is a much more grounded character who is a flesh and blood dude trying to avenge the burning down of his thing, and he's like a legendary.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, but yeah, so no, but I think that was because an author goofed. It should have been Grombrindal in that moment, because he even tried. Yeah, he's literally Grombrindal in that moment, because he even tries to advise Thorgrim to go to Averheim to fight alongside the humans, and Thorgrim's like, "No, I must stay here." And he's like, "Okay, I get it, but I'm going to lead Ungrim and the other guys there." And then he vanishes. He was literally just Grombrindal. I'm realizing now. Goof. All right. Silly.
It's fair to say that we have many opinions on the End Times.
Yeah.
Few of them are positive.
Has Grombrindal ever tried to actually kill Malekith? No. They don't meet each other until the End Times, and it was a goofy. The way they did it was very silly, because he literally just saves them from a vermin lord and then vanishes, which makes no sense.
Rubbish.
Yeah. So sadly, no. Would he have teamed up with a Lithnar? No. I think Grombrindal would view a Lithnar is like a black vengeance. Just like
Lithnar is not a good elf.
Yeah, no. I think Grombrindal would look at a Lithnar and say that is the problem, not that is the solution.
A Lithnar is a perfect example of an Agraith elf.
Yeah.
He is another version of Malekith, but the worst side of it, rather than what he perceives as in Malekith to be the better side.
Yeah, a Lithnar doesn't even, like, at least Malekith's out there building a nation and doing shit. A Lithnar is just horrific. A Lithnar is literally a terrorist that doesn't die. He's horrifying. He's out there just war criming his way across the world. Swexa, why didn't Grombrindal take the role of guiding figure for the dwarves to see them through the End Times? Is he nothing more than his vengeful spirit? Is there more depth to him? He was trying his best, but once more, he can't be everywhere at once. And you have to think the End Times is a worldwide apocalypse.
Yeah, I'm going to answer that differently, because the End Times was written crap.
There you go. That's also that. Yeah, I mean, he doesn't show up to the very end anyway. And
exactly. It just the full appreciation of everything that exists in the Warhammer world was not approached. Instead, they just focused in on some individual bits and forgot the rest of the stuff. And as the books came out, it was almost like, oh, wait a minute, let's tack this bit on top as well. And it just, no.
Oh yeah, someone in chat actually brought up, which is true. He's not a special character technically, but King Grundadrak of Zufbar has met Grombrindal. He met him when he was a prince, because Grombrindal came to warn his father.
Yeah, that's in the story I was mentioning back in White Dwarf 300. There's a nice where the whole thing is detailed in there.
Or Masters of Stone and Steel, the omnibus has a Grombrindal story. Which is also about the King Grundadrak, who's one of my favorite kings, because the story is fucking awesome. Because it's not about a single battle; it's about his life, which is the way the story should be told. It's so much better.
Indeed.
Let's see. What exactly is going on? Okay, we already talked about his axe. What kind of meal would ogres make from Grombrindal? No ogre could kill Grombrindal. Get out of here. Get out of here with that. They choke on him, is what they do. Does Grombrindal count as undead?
No.
He's more like
he's more like a god.
Yeah, he's more like a god. So he's kind of more like a demon prince. If you want to get technical, but it's hard because we don't know exactly where he went when he died. And what he came back from.
Keeping it at its simplest, if you accept dwarf lore as it's presented, He goes off into the halls of his ancestors and he returns. That does not make you undead.
Yeah.
He is a dwarf. He is not another species. He is by nature anti-magical. So the concept of undeath comes along with magic being used to prolong afterlife, so to speak. That's not the case here. It's quite different. He is quite objectively different to undead things.
And he is alive. Like, he bleeds and he feels pain and all that stuff when he's around. So he's not undead by any definition.
I mean, if they were really doing an end times that properly projected and had that, they should have had Gazul, the Lord of the Lord of the Underworld, releasing all the dwarven souls and bringing them back to war, singing the dirge and the morning chant.
But it's the last scene we get of the dwarves, and
it's weak,
and it's terrible. It's terrible.
Indeed. And that should have been a thing.
Yeah. KFC said, does Grombrindal only help out dwarfs, or does he help out other races? Primarily dwarfs, but I would not say by any stretch of the imagination that it's unlikely for him to help humans or maybe even elves if the situation calls for it. If there's something they have to do that will impact the health and survival of the Karazankor, Grombrindal has a very likely chance to be involved.
Yeah, I would tie it through to an oath.
Yeah.
So if there's an oath that needs to be fulfilled and that involves working with something else, he will be there fulfilling that oath, which may in turn mean helping a human settlement hold off something. And why is he doing that? Because another dwarf had made a promise to see that through, and Grombrindal's come along, spoken to that dying dwarf, for example. The dwarf says, but I have to do this, and he's like, don't worry, laddie, I'll sort it out for you. You can go off into the Hall of the Ancestors proud at everything you've done. I will now move on, and I will resolve your oath for you. And that allows Grombrindal to be defending a human settlement in the most unlikely of situations, because it ties through to the dwarfs.
Yeah, and like, if you wanted to tell a really good story that could have flashbacks that are a fun tragedy, Grombrindal helping an elf who had a friend, a genuine friend, during obviously their friend has passed away after the War of Vengeance, but that elf, like, he never broke his oaths and he stayed true to that dwarf, and something happens to him later where he's in the old world for whatever reason and Grombrindal appears to him. You could have a lot of fun with that.
Yeah, you totally could.
Does Grombrindal hate elves, greenskins, or chaos more? I think he would hate chaos more than anything, but dwarves do have a pretty notable source point for greenskins.
Yeah, and Snorri was at war with both of them, and I think in terms of who he is, Chaos is ultimately the objective bad guy, but the greenskins are responsible for breaking down the vast majority of what he built. So the hatred lies with the greenskins, while the business, the actual job, lies with taking down Chaos.
Yeah, if you ask
10,000 of them.
Yeah. If you asked him that, he would probably give you a cheeky quote about how you should pick between like greater evils. They're all equally bad. Let's see. We've already answered all these. Would you consider Grombrindal's Oath of Vengeance similar to a Slayer's Oath, trying to right the wrong that I think we've talked a fair bit about that, and there are some interesting similarities there.
Yes. Dwarven oaths are deep and abiding, and the Oath of the Slayer, or in this case, the Oath of Vengeance, if you wish to call it as so, are of the same type. They're similar ilk, very different outcomes.
Do the dwarves know who Grombrindal is? No. They have theories and myths and cultural pastimes that discuss the concept, but they do not know for sure.
Indeed, it's quite clearly marked out in the sagas that there's 47, I think it's 47 off the top of my head, 47 different versions of who he might be. Included in that is Snorri Whitebeard. So the truth is known, and some believe it's Snorri Whitebeard, but that in no way means that the dwarfs know. It just means that some have some beliefs, others have other beliefs. As I said earlier on in the stream, some of them believe that he indeed may even have been a slayer.
Possibly a question about the White Dwarf. A lot of the art and models that exist of him does not seem lore accurate at all. Does this bother y'all? No, because that's they did yearly models, which were just meant to celebrate the character and give you cool models that you could kit bash and stuff that represent him in one of many different forms he could take or different guises. It's just for marketing funds. It was just to celebrate the magazine. There's Yeah, it's just for fun.
The answer is clearly, no, I wouldn't worry too much about this one. He is a marketing piece that has become something more important to the overall lore, and it in no way impacts the lore and all the cool that it adds to the story. I would say what bugs me more is the lack of proper consideration for how to resolve his story within the end times.
Yep. Sun Kyle, why doesn't Grombrindal just simply kill Malekith? A, you're assuming he could just out of a whim, which is probably not true.
Want to.
Yeah, or B, he probably doesn't want to. And C, if his goal is to protect the Karazhan Core, which means the world, it very well could be he knows that Malekith needs to be alive until it reaches such a point where it's no longer salvageable.
Yeah, totally. Malekith is an absolutely integral piece in the great puzzle of the Warhammer world. Kill him, and the Warhammer world is weaker. But more beyond that, it's his. Really, I think it is fair to say it's his son, and it is a son. He's a son who's made mistakes, and you don't kill your mistakes. And if anything, it'd almost be kinslaying as far as good old White Dwarf is concerned.
That's a very fair way to put
because of the very nature of their relationship. This would be like kinslaying to him, utterly unacceptable. His job is not to do that. His job is to fix Malekith. His job is to fix this or possibly kill it, if that's how you wish to view the eventual psychology here. But for me, given the oath sworn, it's his job to fix it, which means no, killing him is almost the opposite of the outcome that I think would make the best sense for Grombrindal.
Yeah, especially you have to keep in mind as well that Grombrindal's got like a billion things to do. Going after Malekith would be very time consuming. And he's got other places he needs to be and dwarves that he could help rather than pursuing something that's not really going to help anybody. It would just be for him. What would Grombrindal be like if he ate dinner and shared some bugwoods with him? Probably relatively pleasant, but if he got a little deep in his cups, he'd probably start to get a little depressing, to be honest. That's usually how he's portrayed.
Yeah, he's generally, in most of the examples you get from the Warhammer side of the stories, he is just a dwarf. And I know that that might sound obvious, but he's kind of just a dwarf, a very old, very wise, but quick to move on dwarf, where often dwarves quickly get stung with their pride whenever they're, for example, contradicted. He doesn't. He's just like, well, that's your choice. Away you go, do your thing. And inevitably, they collapse. He's been revealed as Grombrindal, the actual White Dwarf, and they're all full of regrets because they wish they'd listened to him. And that's often not the case, as it may be according to the individual story at hand. And he generally presents himself as just, a pipe-smoking, beer-drinking dwarf. So I don't think he would necessarily, if you were to encounter him in the Warhammer world, when you had a holiday over there, I don't think he would necessarily be any better or worse, but possibly, especially if you look at the overall story, he may be more forgiving than you might expect.
Yeah, he's actually probably one of the best dwarfs to hang out with because he would be much more forgiving of your inevitable screw up in the conversation. All right, I'm gonna speed through the rest of these because we're pretty much out of time.
We are almost we are out of time. Holy crap.
Grombrindal versus Galroch.
We got a lot of super chats to do as well, just to make sure we will get to them. Don't worry.
Yes. In fact, we're going to jump to those here in just a second. And the rest of these comments I'll just answer off stream because we're out of time. But I will say Grombrindal versus Galroch. Go check out the Galroch stream. What probably has happened, probably has been like a group of dwarfs were saved by Grombrindal who held off Galroch for a time. Would be a really cool fight. Grombrindal's probably not really great in the position to kill Galroch, but he definitely can hold him off. He's
still going to be Galroch in my head.
Yeah. Hey, that's fine. Sounds cool. It sounds much cooler, but I'm not going to do that.
I am. I'm
okay.
Scottish.
Let me get caught up on all these. Whoops. I meant to click this one. Are Grombrindal and Lord Croak the same kind of dead? No, because Lord Croak is actually dead. He is a corpse whose spirit is bound to his body and hangs around his body. Like it can leave for little periods of time, but ultimately he is grounded to his physical body. Grombrindal is a physical being. He's like flesh and blood. He is not a spirit. When they call him a spirit of vengeance, its entity is a much more appropriate word.
Yeah, agreed completely. 100%.
Biofoot. I'm just rolling in now. Loremaster of Sotek, if you could discuss Grombrindal's long history with the fishmen. Oh, we're out of time. So sorry.
I'm very sorry, but I would suggest going to our Fishmen stream if you want to know more about the long history between Grombrindal and them. We discussed that at length.
Yeah, though in Siri's response has like he ever saved like maybe some dwarves out of Barak Var from a Fishman attack. Very possibly.
Yeah, very possibly.
Grayar, what are your favorite dwarf characters? Mine is Drazoth. I just find him relatable at a deep and spiritual level.
Wow.
That's concerning.
Wow.
Maybe go see Kelp, but for me personally, my favorite character, I mean, I always have a hard time not saying Thorgrim, but I like Belagar more because Belagar has a much more nuanced and tragic story overall. But I'm like
gonna
Thorgrim a lot.
Yeah, so yeah, I'm gonna go with the obvious option. And that's Snorri Whitebeard. And that's not because of the stories they've told. That's because through multiple considerations of that and what Grombrindal is and everything else, there is an enormous story to tell about dwarfs, about their honor, about their oaths, and about the mistakes they've made, where you tend to find that the other characters are all about doubling down on their mistakes and not learning and not moving on, where Snorri is a character that is ripe with potential, particularly given many of the stories where he's brought up, where he quite clearly is about much more than that. He's about realizing mistakes happen and sometimes must be forgiven, unlike most dwarfs who do not take that route. And I think because of that, he makes a massively fascinating character. I actually love the White Dwarf and Snorri and everything it represents. I just don't love how it was concluded because I felt like there was this massive open goal. And I don't like falling back on an actual football analogy because holy shit, I do not. That's not me. But there was a massive open goal. And they came up and they went, let's shoot for this part, the stands up there, punt, and completely screwed it up. Not only misunderstanding, not necessarily the character, but what the character could be, but misunderstanding all the other connected characters too, leaving us with a story that was ultimately a giant meh. So I love that character.
Yep. Yeah, and I'll double down on that. I do like Belagar as kind of a really good exploration of why the dwarfs kind of needed to adapt and what happens when they don't. Mendates, Malekith, Snorri, the silence was long. In all the centuries, Angarak had never heard that tone from the Witch King before. It was unthinkable. Yeah, I will say, I would have sold my soul for the scene of Grombrindal appearing, and like Andy said, of having Grombrindal explaining to Malekith what he did wrong, and them, and then like either killing him or whatever happens after that.
So many great stories potentially there.
Getting to have had Malekith's reaction, because like we don't actually even see it in the end times. Even in the end times, Snorri doesn't actually appear to him; he just saves him and vanishes. But like getting to see how Malekith would have reacted to Snorri, like imagine this friend or father figure, or however you want to look at it, who appears to you, and suddenly you go, "Oh fuck!" It not only is he real, he knows everything I've done. Like you would know that instantly. And if like, what would Malekith do? Would he try to explain himself? Would he immediately just be like, I had to do it? Like just how Malekith would have reacted. It would have been such a unique version of the character because it wouldn't be Malekith, the Witch King. He'd be back to Malekith the Young, Malekith before everything went wrong. And that would be fucking awesome.
Yeah. There's so much potential character development there that was wasted.
Yep. Did Malekith and Grombrindal bond over incident? Probably didn't come up. I'm going to be honest.
Oh dear.
Some elf. Doth wife mother know you weareth her drapes? Hey, it's a nice cloak. It's a gift. It's not. Let's see. Grombrindal's armor is made of mithril because it doesn't exist anymore. LOL. No, mithril exists in Warhammer Fantasy, but
yeah, mithril does get mentioned in a couple of places in Warhammer Fantasy because, hey, it definitely didn't rip off Lord of the Rings. Anyway.
Yeah, that being said, it's used virtually never, but it does exist because most writers look in and go, we probably shouldn't use this.
Yeah, and for good reason.
Yeah. Hey, Uncle Gazul, want this extra sick pack of Bugmans? No, I'm not trying to butter you up, but now that you mention it, can I borrow your car for a bit?
That.
Yeah. By the gears of Zufbar! Yeah. Good old Total War engineers. The Black Gobbo is in 40k as a tech priest, Grombrindal's drooling servitor, as it should be the Groby Wazak. Wow, Black Gobbo got just
Hey, look at that. Hey, Phil, nice. It's Black Gobble.
Yeah, Black Gobble artwork. My favorite Black Gobble lore fact is he keeps his feet warm using dwarf beard hair. Like the evil cackling. Hammond, is there a connection to Uotun and Thugni? I assume Andy Warhammerified Odin/Wotan and made him the god of oak trees. Odin hanged himself to Yggdrasil and learned the rune of knowledge. Did Thugni do the same?
No, I didn't do the same.
Lidor, if you want to antagonize Andy more about that, I'm sure he'll do another stream in the near future. Lidor, hey, the Bretonians who built their culture out of elven runes are influenced by the elves' adjacent goddess and turned out French. They are the proof the elves are indeed French. He's got us there. He's got us there. They got their accent from the ruins. Bernard Damerval, first time catching you two live. Heard that Grimnir only forged 2 axes, but that Grombrindal manifested a 3rd one. True at all. We've talked about that. Hopefully, you got your answer during the stream.
Yep.
I think we already answered that one as well. And then think there was a last one that came in from Cameo. Thank you. Do you think Snorri could have mitigated Marathi's influence over Malekith had he lived longer? Yes.
Yeah.
I think he was heavily mitigating Marathi's influence.
Yep, agreed completely. And Marathi's influence is quite clearly what turns Malekith into what Malekith becomes.
Yeah, like we talk about that a lot in the Malekith stream. If you want to go back and watch it, that Snorri's death is a huge pivot point for Malekith's life. It's quite literally his father figure time. Again, poor man.
It hurts, man. It hurts.
Yeah, like elves are already so emotional, but most elves don't even have to deal with their dads dying a lot of the time, or it happens only once. Malekith had to go through it twice.
Totally.
All right, so that is it for us today. We hope you all really enjoyed the Grombrindal stream. It's a bit of an unusual one for a character stream because he's more of a concept than a real character in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But hopefully a lot of your questions got answered and you had a really good time. And thank you all for joining us. There's going to be a very exciting poll coming up for next week because I have been sneaking in on a lot of Andy streams and paying attention to my chats. And there have been a lot of really requested ones. So I'm going to torture all of you by putting up your most requested options. And you get one of them.
It's gonna be super fun. So again, from my side, thank you all so much for turning up. Obviously, your continued appearance every single week delights us. So thank you so much for coming along. And of course, because I can't help myself, go pre-order Dark Deeds.
Yes, please.
So go do that. It makes an enormous difference for me personally, and of course for my team over on that side too, because we have been working very hard on making the best, most fun game we possibly could. And we hope you enjoy it even half as much as we do, because we adore the game.
And once again, happy Easter to all y'all. Happy Trans Day. Happy whatever the other one was. I think it was like Taco Day or something. So
I do love tacos.
Oh God, tacos are my reason for being. So please take care of yourselves and have a lovely week. There's a very good chance, maybe possibly, we'll do something this Wednesday. So keep your ears out for that. And we'll see you guys later. Thanks for watching.
See you later. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.